Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight's story, dive into Angron's rebellion on Syria. As always, before we get to the madness, be sure to like and comment on videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for the support. You have been absolutely killing it. Now, let's get into the madness.
The wind had eaten the dead down to bone. It came howling over the Deshalika heights, with the thin, joyless voice of Nuceria's winter, scraping powdered ice across black stone and worrying at skeletons that had lain exposed to 100 years of sun, frost, and neglect. Ribs protruded from the earth like the broken spars of wrecked ships. Vertebrae rested in frozen gullies where meltwater had carried them from the places their owners had fallen. Here lay half a pelvis, locked beneath a crust of snow. There, the yellowed bowl of a skull stared sightlessly at the heavens through a hole punched into its brow. The High Riders had left the dead where they had slaughtered them. Time had done what carrion beasts and weather could not, stripping away flesh, clothing, hair and blood, until nothing remained but the hard white architecture beneath. Angron walked among those remains without speaking. He seemed too vast for the mountains, a red-armored giant moving through the graveyard of mortals who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Brass and iron shifted upon his warplate with each step. The mechanisms buried in his skull twitched beneath scarred flesh. He had crossed worlds beneath artillery barrages that turned forests into burning glass. He had endured wounds that would have reduced mortal soldiers to twitching heaps of viscera. He had broken Astartes in his hands and continued fighting while his own blood sheeted from him in ropes. Yet here, with nothing firing upon him and no enemy within reach, the Primarch's hands trembled. Khan saw it and said nothing. He followed several paces behind his gene-sire, helm mag-locked at his hip, the cold striking his shaven scalp and tracing pale vapor from his mouth. His armor bore the scars of the Shadow Crusade, white and blue beneath soot, dried blood, and the black scoring of weapons fire. Gorachild hung at his side, silent now, its adamantine teeth motionless. Khan had seen Angron charge gun lines that had already massacred entire companies. He had watched his Primarch tear through armored bulkheads rather than waste seconds waiting for them to open. He had seen him disappear beneath mobs of enemies and rise from beneath the bodies, with red ruin hanging from his fists. Fear was something other men experienced in Angron's presence. Pain was an irritation. Injury was a challenge. Death seemed less an ending than an opponent the Primarch intended to throttle when at last it gathered the courage to approach him. Bones were different. Khan watched Angron stop beside the remains of a small skeleton and lower his gaze. The Primarch's shoulders moved once, not a sob. Khan could not imagine such a sound coming from him, something less comprehensible, a tremor passing through a creature built to conquer worlds. Khan shifted his weight. Argyltal's gauntlet closed around his forearm before he could step forward. "Do not," the word-bearer murmured. Khan looked at him. Argyltal's face was grave, the tattoos and scars upon it dark beneath the mountain light. "There are wounds armor does not cover, brother." Khan glanced again toward Angron. "He is my Primarch." "Today," Argyltal replied, "that may be the reason you should leave him alone." Lorgar stood farther back. Crozius held loosely at his side, crimson plate dulled by the grey daylight. Of them all, he alone seemed willing to look openly upon Angron's grief. The word-bearer's Primarch possessed the patience of a confessor and the dangerous gentleness of a man who believed every silence concealed a truth, waiting to be coaxed into speech. He did not approach immediately. He watched his brother kneel. Angron brushed snow from the little skeleton with fingers that had pulped men inside their armor. Several ribs were missing. One arm ended above the elbow. The skull had been crushed along one side. The bone caved inward, as though struck by a weapon heavier than any mortal should have survived. Angron touched the ruined cranium with the tip of one claw. "Larbaden," he said. His voice was quieter than Khan had heard it in years. Lost the arm before this. Rot took it after Yochura cut him out from under a dead war beast. He would not let us leave him, would not let us carry him either. A crooked smile touched the Primarch's mouth and vanished. Stubborn bastard. He moved to another scattering of bones almost swallowed by stones. Asti. His hand closed around. Something hidden beneath the snow and came up holding the corroded remains of a knife blade. Always stealing mine. Had knives in his boots, his belt, stitched inside his rags. Once told me a man only needed one good blade. Angron turned the rusted metal between his fingers. He had 11. Khan felt something tighten in his chest. They were names. That was what disturbed him. Not casualties, not numbers scratched into a Legion casualty ledger by a serf who would never see the battlefield. Names spoken by Angron as though the intervening century were nothing. The World Eaters had carved their way through armies beneath him, and Khan had watched the Primarch forget warriors within hours of their deaths. Yet he remembered these mortals. He remembered their missing limbs, their habits, the weapons they carried, the stupid things they had said beside campfires when none of them knew whether dawn would bring pursuit. Angron stood again and walked on. "Clester," he said, when he saw the narrow iron shaft half buried beneath scree. He dragged it free. The metal had almost entirely rusted through, but a warped fork of machinery still clung beneath the spearhead. Shriek spear, ugly thing, made a noise like a skinned animal when she drove it into somebody. High Rider artificers built it for the pits, thought terror made better sport. He let the weapon fall. Clester made them afraid of their own toy. Several steps later, he paused beside loops of blackened chain fused together by corrosion. Yoshura. Angron's lips pulled back from his teeth. He used these around throats. Men in armor thought plate made them safe. Yochura never cared about the armor. He would hook the chain beneath a helm and pull until the neck opened. Sometimes the head came with it. The Primarch stared at the chains. He laughed every time. "They were your army," Lorgar said at last. Angron's head turned. The movement was slow, but Khan felt his muscles tighten instinctively. Lorgar continued before the silence sharpened. "Not merely fellow captives. You speak of them as warriors." Angron rose to his full height. "They were my brothers and sisters. I meant no insult." "Then choose words that do not sound like one." Lorgar inclined his head, accepting the rebuke with maddening serenity. Angron looked back across the graveyard. "Army." He spat the word into the snow. "You think armies need banners, officers, brass pinned to their chests? We had chains. Half of us still wore pieces of them when we started killing our masters. We had pit blades, broken spears, hooks meant for gutting arena beasts. We had whatever we could tear from the hands of the first fool we killed." He pointed toward the distant valley, where broken terraces descended through the mountains. They had soldiers, kinguard in plate, lasers, machine guns, grenades, armories full enough to murder us 1,000 times. His expression twisted into something between pride and hatred. "And they still learned to fear us." Lorgar stepped nearer, careful not to tread upon the bones. "The High Riders." Angron barked a humorless laugh. "You want the story behind the name. I want to understand." "Of course you do. Always understanding. Always digging until you find a truth you can worship." Lorgar did not rise to it. Angron looked up slope, toward the distant ridges disappearing into white haze. "They lived above us. That is all. Above the pits, above the cages, above the streets where their servants worked themselves bloody. Their estates climbed the cliffs, and their viewing galleries looked down into the arenas. They ate while we killed each other, drank while men drowned in their own blood, applauded when somebody's belly opened and the guts came out warm enough to steam on the sand." His fingers flexed, nails scraping against his gauntlets. "So we called them what they were, High Riders, men who spent their lives looking down. pulse moved beneath the scar tissue along his scalp. The butcher's nails stirred. Khan recognized the minute tightening around his gene-sire's eyes, the first warning before agony became fury. Angron continued softer. They learned there are disadvantages to living above people. It is a long way to fall. The nails bit harder. Angron felt them awaken behind his eyes, a nest of metal hatred threaded through the meat of his brain. Pain came without warning and without novelty. It was old pain, intimate as breath. The implants drove their invisible teeth into him and punished the memory, because memory was not violence. The mechanism did not care that he stood upon the graves of the only people he had once loved without qualification. It knew only that he was still. Stillness was wrong. Reflection was wrong. Grief was wrong. The nails demanded motion, impact, screaming muscle, rupturing organs, the hot chemical flood that came when rage finally drowned every other thought. His hand closed. The corroded knife blade snapped in his fist, rust and iron fragments spilling between his fingers. Khan shifted almost imperceptibly. He knew what came next. Angron would roar. He would strike something, perhaps a boulder, perhaps one of them, perhaps the mountain itself, if nothing living presented a better target. Argyltal's posture changed as Raum sensed the same danger beneath his flesh. Even Lorgar's gaze sharpened. Angron merely breathed. Once. Again. Blood ran from his palm where the broken metal had pierced a joint in his gauntlet. "They used to think we were stupid," he whispered. The quiet was worse than a roar. Khan had stood in strategiums, while Angron tore hololithic projectors from their mounts, because officers discussed casualty percentages as though lives were ammunition. He had seen him execute commanders for failing impossible deadlines and butcher his own sons when the nails reduced thought to red instinct. This Angron frightened him more. "We learned their guns," the Primarch said. "Not well, not like soldiers. Asti once held a captured Lazrifal backwards and nearly burned Jochura's face off when he found the trigger. Jochura beat him bloody for it. Then we spent the night learning how the weapon worked." Angron's mouth twitched. "We had no manufactoria, no ammunition trains, no armorers following behind us with sacred oils and spare parts. When a weapon broke, we fixed it badly. When a charge pack died, we threw it away. When ammunition ran out, we went back to blades." He bent, picked up a human femur, and studied the old fracture running through it. But blades do not run empty. He crushed the bone without seeming to exert himself. It collapsed between his fingers into splinters and white dust. Neither does hatred. A memory surfaced with the violence of a blade pushed beneath a rib. Falkar. He smelled mud instead of snow, heard shields hammering together until the noise became one enormous metallic heartbeat. He saw Clesta standing somewhere to his left, blood black across half her face, shriek spear raised over the interlocked shields. Jochura was screaming at men to close a gap where 3 fighters had been pulped by machine gun fire. A high rider line advanced through smoke, visors glinting, disciplined boots crushing their own wounded beneath them because some perfumed lordling behind the lines had ordered a charge. The memory broke apart and returned in fragments. A grenade landed behind the shield wall. Someone kicked it forward. It detonated between formations, blowing a Kinguard soldier in half and flinging his pelvis over the rebels like butchered meat. The 2 lines struck. Shields became coffins. Men were compressed between bodies until ribs snapped and lungs burst. A spear entered a mouth and burst through the back of the skull, trailing teeth. Somebody's intestines spilled over Angron's forearm, wet loops twisting around his wrist, while their owner tried to push them back into a belly opened from hip to sternum. Angron had laughed then, not because it was amusing, because Falkar had been impossible, and they had done it anyway. "Falkar," he said. No one answered. Lorgar looked to Khan. Khan gave the smallest shake of his head. The name meant nothing to him. That ignorance suddenly felt obscene. Angron noticed. "You do not know it." "No, sire. Khan admitted. Angron's gaze hardened. Of course you do not. Why would you? No remembrancer wrote it down. No iterators turned it into a lesson about unity. No statues. His contempt thickened every word. We built a shield wall at Falka from arena boards, stolen riot shields and doors ripped off farm machines. They came at us because their masters told them slaves would break if charged by real soldiers. His teeth showed. We did not break. Lorgar watched him carefully. You defeated them. We annihilated them. Angron looked away. There is a difference. For an instant, Falka returned entire inside him. The roaring press of bodies, the slick footing, Yochura hauling a Kinguard officer backward by the neck until vertebrae cracked one after another, Clesta planting her spear through two men because the first corpse trapped the second against it, Larbadan still possessing both arms then and using one to hold his own torn abdomen closed while the other kept stabbing. Angron remembered forcing himself into the breach and becoming the breach, striking until men ceased resembling men. Heads collapsed under his fists, breastplates folded inward, squeezing organs through ruptured mouths. He tore one soldier's arm free and used the limb to smash another man from his feet. The High Riders had possessed superior weapons. The Eaters of Cities had possessed the certainty that pain was survivable. The nails punished him for stopping at memory. Agony drilled through his skull. His vision whitened at the edges. He heard the distant whine of internal mechanisms, a sound no one else could hear, though perhaps Khan knew it by the way Angron's jaw tightened. Violence offered itself like water to a starving man. Khan stood close enough to kill. Argel Tal closer still. Lorgar's throat was exposed above the gorget of his armor. A single motion could become release. Angron imagined his fist entering flesh, felt phantom cartilage crush beneath his knuckles, imagined blood warm across his hand, and hated the nails for making murder easier to contemplate than mourning. They are dead, Lorgar said softly. Angron turned upon him with such speed that Khan's hand reached Gorechild before thought caught up. Lorgar did not move. I know, Angron said. The words emerged almost without sound. Do you? Lorgar asked. Angron's eyes burned. Brother, do not call me that here. The mountains seemed to hold their breath. Not here. He walked away from them, deeper among the bones. His sons remained behind. His brother remained behind. The nails remained, because the nails always remained. Angron crossed ground where he had once expected to die, and the century between then and now began collapsing beneath his feet. Snow scraped across stone and became pale arena sand. The mountain wind found gaps in his armor and became the breath of thousands packed into galleries above a killing floor. A loose fragment of bone cracked under his boot, and the sound became a wooden practice blade breaking against somebody's skull. He tasted iron. For a moment he assumed he had bitten through his tongue. Then he remembered another mouth, another age, another body not yet grown into the monstrous engine of war stalking these graves. Blood had always tasted the same. The galaxy changed. Empires lied. Men gave themselves new titles and called old cruelties necessary. Blood remained honest. He remembered darkness beneath Deshea, stone sweating with subterranean damp, the smell of old blood baked into walls no amount of scrubbing could cleanse, human waste, rust, cheap disinfectant, men breathing through broken noses, someone moaning until a guard struck the cage bars and threatened to cut the noise out of him. Angron remembered himself before the Legion knew his name, before warriors in white armor knelt and called him Gene-Sire, before captains waited for his approval and worlds burned because his fleet entered their skies. He had possessed nothing, not a ship, not armor, not even the right to choose when he slept. And somehow, impossibly, he remembered being less empty. Before the nails there had been pain, but pain had ended. Before the rebellion there had been chains, but there had also been hands reaching through darkness to share stolen food. Before the Emperor there had been masters, but he had known exactly what they were. There had been no lies about compliance, unity, or the destiny of mankind. A chain was a chain. An arena was an arena. A master who demanded blood for amusement had at least possessed the decency not to name slavery liberation. Angron closed his eyes upon the mountain. When he opened them again, he was lying on cold stone beneath Deshea, younger than any world-eater had ever known him, his body a map of wounds, and his mouth thick with blood. Iron bars stood before him. Darkness pressed against the cage. Somewhere close, a man shifted painfully and reached for him through the black. "Rise, Angron," Wenemaeus said. "If you cannot stand when they come, the masters will punish us both." Angron rose because Wenemaeus had told him to. At first there was nothing more complicated than that. His palms pressed against stone slick with condensation and old filth. His arms trembled beneath a weight that would have crippled a mortal man, and something beneath his ribs ground wetly where a wound had opened again. The masters had fed them after the last bout, which meant a bowl of grey mash scraped from vats in the feeding hall, a thumb of water carrying the mineral taste of rusted pipes, and a strip of meat too stringy to identify. Angron had given half the meat away. Hunger remained inside him like another animal, but hunger was familiar. He unfolded himself from the floor of the cage until his shoulders nearly touched the low ceiling. Even young, even starved, even scarred by wounds, the arena chirurgeons had treated only because his continued existence remained profitable. He dwarfed most of the men imprisoned beneath Deshea. Iron ownership bands circled his wrists. Brands marred his flesh. A collar lay against his throat, not because anyone seriously believed the strip of metal could hold him if he chose to break it, but because the High Riders believed symbols mattered. The collar told every watching servant, guard and slave that the giant belonged to someone. Wenemaeus leaned against the opposite wall with his arms folded. "Better," he said. Angron spat blood onto the floor. "I was standing yesterday. Yesterday you had fewer holes in you. Then they should stop making holes." Wenemaeus smiled without humor. "Tell them that in the arena. I am certain they will apologize." There was nothing soft about Wenemaeus. Age had not gentled him, because the pits did not permit men to age gently. Scar tissue divided his scalp and crossed one cheek in a white rope where a hooked blade had once entered beside the eye. Several fingers had healed crooked. His nose had been broken so often that it appeared to have surrendered any intention of resembling its original shape, and there was an old stiffness in his left knee that became worse whenever cold air descended through the ventilation shafts. Angron had watched him kill with that bad knee pressed against an opponent's chest while sawing through the man's throat with the edge of a broken shield. Wenemaeus survived because he understood that survival was not glory. He knew which wounds could be ignored until after a bout, and which would bleed a man empty before the crowd grew bored. He knew the difference between a fighter feigning exhaustion and one whose lungs were filling with blood. He could read the pattern of signal horns from the arena galleries and tell whether the masters wanted spectacle, punishment, or execution. More importantly, he had taught Angron that the desires of the crowd were not commands from the universe. "They will try to make you angry today," Wenemaeus said. "Why?" "Because you are more entertaining angry. Then I will disappoint them." Wenemaeus regarded the immense youth before him. "That would be the first intelligent thing you have done this week." The locks opened before Angron could answer. Iron doors retracted with the heavy clank of mechanisms buried inside the walls, and handlers came through wearing segmented protection over their throats and groins, the places pit fighters reached first when they ceased respecting orders. Shock goads crackled in their fists. Behind them stood kin guard, with long guns held across lacquered breastplates. The message was precise. The handlers could hurt a slave. The kin guard could kill one. Angron stared at the guns. He had been studying them for months without understanding everything he saw. Energy weapon, Wenemaeus had told him. No projectile. Light and heat. Do not trust cover merely because it stops steel. Angron remembered every word Oenomaus ever gave him about killing, because lessons learned in Deshir were usually written in corpses. "Move," a handler ordered. Oenomaus moved immediately. Angron waited until the shock goad lifted, then followed. It was a small defiance, almost meaningless. The handler knew it. Angron knew it. Oenomaus knew it. That was why it mattered. The underworks beneath the arena were a kingdom built for suffering. Pens opened onto preparation halls, stained brown beneath generations of scrubbing. Armorers stood beside racks of weapons, selected not for efficiency, but appearance. Arena chirurgeons worked at iron tables, where injured fighters were sewn, cauterized, drained or amputated, according to calculations of value. A dying novice might receive nothing but a bucket beneath the table, so his blood did not make the floor dangerous. A champion could lose half his abdomen and awaken surrounded by machines, because a high rider house had wagered heavily upon his next appearance. Food obeyed the same arithmetic. Victors ate. Valuable fighters ate more. Troublemakers discovered that a ration could become half a ration, and half a ration could become nothing at all. Punishment cages stood where every slave passed on the way to the sand. A man hung in one now, naked and unconscious, wrists black from restraints. His offense had been written on a slate beneath him. Refusal. No one asked what he had refused. In Deshir, the word was crime enough. Clesta waited at the weapon racks with her shriek spear resting across one shoulder. The weapon was longer than she was tall. Its narrow blade fitted above a device that screamed when pressure activated it, transforming every thrust into a metallic shriek designed to delight spectators and unsettle opponents. "Big one lives," she said when Angron approached. "I owe Asti food." "You wagered on me dying?" Angron asked. "No. Asti wagered you would die. I merely took advantage of his stupidity." Somewhere behind them, Asti answered. "A man who never wagers against Angron never receives favorable odds." He slipped between two handlers with the innocent expression of someone who had committed several crimes since waking. He was narrow-shouldered and quick-handed, with a scar across his chin and nothing visible that resembled a weapon. Oenomaus searched him with his eyes. "Give it back." Asti frowned. "Give what back?" "The knife." "Which knife?" Jochura laughed from beside the chain racks. He was thick through the chest, his wrists layered with old friction scars from years of fighting with weighted links. "That means he has more than one." Asti sighed and produced a little blade from beneath the seam of his belt. Oenomaus held out his hand. Asti surrendered another from his boot. "All of them." A third appeared from his sleeve. Clesta shook her head. Larbadan, sitting while an armorer wrapped a cracked shin, said, "Search his arse." Asti looked wounded. "There are limits to friendship." "Not in Deshir," Jochura told him. A horn sounded above them. Laughter died. The armorers began issuing weapons. Angron received a short, heavy blade with a squared tip and a shield too small for his arm. Oenomaus's mouth hardened. "They want you close." Angron tested the shield strap. "I am always close." "That is why you keep bleeding." Another horn sounded, lower than the first. Oenomaus tilted his head. "Multiple opponents." "How many?" "Enough that they expect you to work for your supper." He caught Angron's shoulder before the handlers separated them. "Do not chase the first man they put in front of you. Watch the gates. If one opens behind you, move left. The sand slopes near the west wall." Angron nodded. "And breathe." "I know how. You forget whenever someone tries to kill you. They distract me." The gates opened onto thunder. Deshir rose around him in tiers of polished stone and shaded galleries, a vast bowl filled with men and women who had come to watch other people suffer. The lowest seats belonged to lesser patrons and functionaries. Higher galleries were curtained against the heat, their occupants reclining above the arena floor, with servants carrying chilled drinks and trays of meat. Highest of all almost hidden by distance, the ruling houses occupied balconies from which the people below appeared small enough to mistake for pieces on a game board. Angron entered beneath them all. Red sand grated beneath his bare feet. Old stains darkened the ground where even the rake crews had failed to remove every trace of yesterday's killing. Across the arena, 3 gates opened. 5 men emerged. The crowd roared its approval. Angron did not look at them first. He looked behind himself. The gate had closed. He looked left and saw the subtle fall in the sand Oenomaus had warned him about. Then he studied his opponents. 2 carried hooked polearms. 1 bore a rectangular shield and stabbing spear. Another carried a weighted net and short trident. The last wore more armor than the others and held a broad chopping blade in both hands. None looked pleased to see him. The armored man shouted, "Nothing personal, giant." Angron raised the little shield. "Then go back through your gate." The crowd laughed. The man did not. They came together rather than individually, which told Angron they had been allowed to plan. The net fighter moved first, not throwing his weapon, but spreading it wide to restrict Angron's retreat. The spearman advanced behind the shield. The polearms separated to either flank. Sensible. They did not need to overpower him. They needed to occupy his arms, attack his legs, and place enough steel into his body that strength became irrelevant. Angron retreated toward the shallow slope. The crowd booed immediately. Good. Let them. The first polearm hooked for his ankle. Angron lifted his foot and stamped upon the shaft hard enough to crack the wood. The second weapon came for his shoulder. He caught it against the undersized shield, let the hook bite the rim, and pulled. Its wielder stumbled forward, despite releasing almost immediately. Angron crossed the remaining distance in 1 stride and struck him with the shield. Bone gave way with a sound, like wet branches snapping. The man left the ground, landed several paces away, and rolled over himself until his spine struck the arena wall. He did not rise. The net came then. Angron remembered Oenomaus telling him never to fight a weapon according to its intended use. A net was supposed to entangle. Therefore, do not become entangled. He seized its weighted edge before it fully opened and pulled. The fighter on the other end had enough discipline to release it. That saved his arms. It did not save him from the iron weight Angron hurled back into his face. Teeth burst outward. The man collapsed screaming, hands pressed to a mouth suddenly flattened beneath his nose. The spearman struck during the distraction. The point entered Angron's side beneath the ribs. Pain arrived cleanly. Angron twisted toward it. The spear should have driven deeper. Instead, his movement trapped the shaft between muscle and bone. The fighter tried to withdraw. Angron clamped an arm against his side and imprisoned the weapon inside himself. Fear entered the man's eyes. Angron knew that expression. He saw it often. He seized the shield rim and pulled. The fighter braced with both feet and both arms. A normal man might have dislocated a shoulder attempting what followed. Angron ripped the shield toward himself so violently that its owner came with it. He struck the man once in the face with the pommel of his blade. The nose vanished into a red hollow. He struck again. The upper jaw collapsed. A third blow broke the skull above the eye, and the body sagged while blood and pale fragments of bone ran down the shield's decorated face. The crowd became deafening. Angron hated them for that. The remaining 2 attacked together. The broad blade struck his shoulder and opened flesh to the muscle. The surviving polearm caught behind his knee. Angron went down on one leg. The crowd screamed approval, thousands rising as though his pain had pulled them upright by invisible chains. The armored fighter raised his weapon for Angron's neck. Angron remembered Oenomaus telling him that armored men trusted armor too much. He drove his thumb into the joint beneath the man's knee. The joint bent sideways. The scream vanished beneath the roar of the galleries. The fighter dropped. Angron caught him by the breastplate and threw him into the remaining polearm wielder. Both men struck the sand together. Angron rose with the spear still protruding from his side, seized the shaft and pulled it free. Blood followed in a dark sheet. The armored fighter tried crawling. His destroyed leg dragged behind him at the wrong angle. Angron could have killed him. The crowd wanted him to. He saw it in the way they leaned forward, heard the chant beginning from the lower tiers. Kill, kill, kill. It spread upward until thousands of mouths shared one desire. Angron looked down at the wounded man. The fighter stared back. Do it. No. Confusion replaced fear. Angron threw the spear aside. The arena erupted in abuse. The handlers entered before the crowd had finished turning upon him. Shock goads cracked against his ribs. Angron endured the first strike. The second made his muscles lock. He still did not kill the wounded fighter. That was the lesson Oenomaus considered more important than any technique of blade or shield. A man who killed because another man commanded it was not dangerous. He was useful. Angron had no intention of being useful. The man with the shattered mouth was dying. Angron found him while handlers dragged the other survivors away. He knelt despite another warning strike from a goad. Blood pulsed weakly between the gladiator's fingers. One eye focused on Angron. The other had swollen shut. His breathing came in wet little clicks. Angron knew nothing could be done. He nevertheless remained. Go, the dying man managed. Angron shook his head. Why? Angron had no answer he could explain. He only knew the man's pain seemed louder than the crowd. Sometimes suffering reached him that way. Not sound, not sight. Something deeper, a pressure behind his thoughts, as if another person's agony were a weight he might place his hands beneath. He touched the gladiator's wrist. The man's breathing eased. Angron's own chest tightened. For several heartbeats, the stranger stopped trembling. Some of the terror left his surviving eye. Angron felt it instead, a coldness passing through him that had nothing to do with blood loss. Then the man died. A handler struck Angron across the shoulders. Move, animal! Angron turned his head. The handler stepped back. That pleased Angron more than the applause ever had. The pits received him again with the stink of blood and boiled disinfectant. Jochura was having 3 cuts sewn without anesthetic because the chirurgeon had decided none threatened his value. Clesta sat cleaning red matter from the screaming mechanism of her spear. Asti had somehow acquired food, despite not having fought that day. Larbadan was arguing with an attendant who insisted the cracked shin required rest. Then give me a new leg, Larbadan said. You cannot fight tomorrow. I can stand. Barely. Standing is enough if the other bastard is lying down. Jochura laughed and immediately cursed when the needle tore through his skin. Asti tossed Angron a strip of meat. You cost me another wager. Angron caught it. Stop wagering against me. Then your continued survival provides me no profit. I could kill you. Asti considered this. That would at least settle my debts. Angron gave the meat to Jochura. Asti stared at him. That was mine. No, Angron said. It was mine. Briefly. Oenomaus approached once the handlers had moved away. He inspected Angron's side, shoulder, and hands before looking him in the eye. Why did you spare him? He was beaten. That has never mattered to the masters. It matters to me. Oenomaus nodded once. No praise. Angron valued that. Praise in the pits belonged to men who wanted something. That night they ate behind bars, while music drifted faintly from somewhere high above the underworks. Some high-rider feast was taking place in the city. The slaves received watered broth because the masters considered the day profitable. Angron sat beside Oenomaus and listened while the older gladiator explained everything that existed beyond the arena walls. Cities, agricultural estates, roads patrolled by kin guard, armories, engines of war, garrisons that numbered more men than Angron could imagine fitting inside Dashia, storehouses capable of feeding armies while escaped slaves starved in wilderness. Oenomaus described none of it to frighten him. That was why Angron listened. You think about escape, Oenomaus said. I think about killing the handlers. That is not escape. It would improve the walk. Oenomaus grunted. You could tear open the cages, perhaps even reach the streets. Then what? We leave. With what food? We take it. From whom? The masters. And when their soldiers come, Angron looked through the bars. We kill them. Oenomaus was silent for a long moment. Strength is not the same as victory, Angron. One man can be stronger than every man he meets, and still die beneath the 100th spear. Then I kill 99 first. You joke. I do not. I know. Oenomaus leaned his head back against the stone. That is what worries me. Angron considered armies he had never seen, weapons he did not understand, and walls he had not yet tested with his hands. None of it altered the simple obscenity at the heart of Oenomaus's argument. The masters possessed more power, therefore the slaves must remain slaves. The thought disgusted him. Would you stay here forever because they have guns? He asked. No. Then what are you telling me? That when you decide to break your chain, boy, make certain you know whose chain you intend to break after yours. Angron looked around the darkness. Jokura slept with chain links wrapped around one hand. Asti was concealing something beneath his bedding. Larbadan muttered curses in his dreams. Clesta sat awake farther down the row, repairing the grip of her shriek spear beneath the weak lumen glow. Angron understood. Not freedom. Their freedom. The next days became weeks measured in blood. Angron fought beasts, condemned prisoners, professional gladiators and men purchased specifically because the High Riders wanted to learn what could kill him. Nothing did. He learned. Every cut taught distance. Every broken weapon taught leverage. Every fighter who survived long enough to surprise him gave him something worth remembering. He learned how a chain fighter shifted his shoulder before casting links. He learned how shield men exposed the rear leg when they stabbed. He learned that a man wearing plate could still be blinded, strangled, thrown, or simply struck until the organs behind the armor ruptured from impact. The crowd gave him names. The masters announced titles before his bouts. He ignored all of them. When High Riders demanded he acknowledge the galleries, he stared instead toward the slave gates. Oenomaus saw it. You hate them more each day. Yes. That can become another kind of chain. Angron wiped blood from his knuckles. You sound afraid. I am old enough to know fear is useful. I am not. That, Oenomaus said, is because you are young enough to be an idiot. Angron almost smiled. Then the summoning horn sounded. It was wrong. Their bout had ended. Angron and Oenomaus had fought together that afternoon, leaving 3 arena beasts dead, and a handler screaming after one dying creature had dragged him across the safety barrier before being put down. They had been washed. Their wounds had been dressed. The crowds should have been departing. Instead, the roar above continued. Handlers entered the pens. Angron, Oenomaus, move. Oenomaus slowly stood. Neither man spoke as they were led through the underworks. They heard the crowd before they saw the light. The arena gates opened again. The galleries were still full. Angron walked onto the red sand beside the man who had taught him how to survive it. There were no opponents waiting, only 2 weapons. 2 blades lay in the center of the arena, placed carefully upon the blood-darkened ground. Oenomaus stopped. Angron understood a heartbeat later. High above them, a master's amplified voice rolled across Deshia. Take up your weapons. The crowd fell silent. Fight. Angron did not move. The 2 blades remained where the servants had laid them upon the red sand, their edges catching the hard white glare of the arena lumens, while tier upon tier of Nuceria's nobility waited for blood. Oenomaus stood opposite him, with his scarred hands hanging empty at his sides. Neither man looked at the weapons. The silence spreading through Deshia became something monstrous in itself. Thousands of spectators withholding breath, because obedience had always been the first law of the pits, and because, until that moment, obedience had seemed as inevitable as gravity. The amplified voice descended from the High Rider's gallery again, polished and dispassionate. "Take up your weapons." Angron raised his eyes toward the distant balconies. He could not distinguish individual faces at that height. He saw silk awnings, polished stone, servants standing with trays, the gleam of drinking vessels, and the indistinct shapes of men who had never slept behind bars. "No," he said. The word was not shouted. It did not need to be. The arena had become so silent that the refusal carried farther than any roar. Wenemaeus closed his eyes for the span of a breath. Angron saw understanding cross the older gladiator's ruined features, and there was no triumph in it. Wenemaeus had spent too many years beneath Dashir to mistake defiance for victory. The masters could endure a slave dying. They could endure a slave killing a handler, maiming another fighter, or even escaping temporarily into the underworks. What they could not permit was a slave standing beneath the gaze of thousands and proving that an order could be refused. The arena existed because everyone participating in it accepted the same lie. The High Riders commanded, therefore others obeyed. Angron had just placed a crack through that lie. Wenemaeus looked across at him. "Boy," he said quietly. Angron's jaw tightened. "Do not. Listen to me." I said no. Wenemaeus glanced toward the galleries. "They are not asking us." Angron understood the warning and hated it. "Then let them come down here and make us." A murmur ran through the spectators. Wenemaeus almost smiled. That is precisely what they cannot allow anyone to hear. The voice from above changed, not in volume, in temperature. "Gladiator Angron, you have been commanded to fight." Angron stared upward. "Come, command me from the sand." The lower galleries erupted first, some in outrage, others in delighted disbelief. The upper tiers remained quieter. Those were the people who understood what had occurred. Angron could feel their attention narrowing upon him. He stepped past one of the blades and planted his bare foot upon it. Steel bent beneath his weight. A groan moved through the crowd. He pressed harder until the weapon snapped against the stone beneath the sand. "I will not kill him for you." Guards appeared at the arena gates, more than usual. Kin guard in lacquered armor, guns held ready. Angron saw Wenemaeus counting them. He was always counting. Gates, weapons, distances, men. "Angron," Wenemaeus said, "whatever comes next, remember that you chose before they chose for you." Angron turned toward him. "I am not killing you." "I know." The gates opened. Wenemaeus' expression hardened. "That is why they will punish you." The kin guard did not attempt to overpower Angron with courage. They used machinery. Weighted cables fired from launchers hidden behind portable mantlets, their barbed heads wrapping his arms and legs before electromagnetic locks clamped shut. Angron ripped the first cable apart and dragged 2 soldiers off their feet with the second. A shock weapon struck his spine. Light burst behind his eyes. He remained standing. Another discharge hit him in the chest, then another against the base of his skull. His muscles convulsed hard enough to split skin across his shoulders. He caught one kin guard by the breastplate and hurled him across the arena. The soldier struck the wall head first. His helm collapsed inward and left a broad red splash down the stone. The crowd screamed in savage delight, momentarily forgetting that the violence was directed at their own servants. Then machinery beneath the arena floor engaged. The cables retracted at once. Angron's legs were torn from under him. He struck the sand shoulder first and gouged a trench through it as the winches dragged him toward the gate. He clawed at the ground, fingers sinking through blood-dark grit to the stone beneath. Wenemaeus shouted his name. Angron twisted enough to see handlers swarming the older man. Then the gate swallowed him. They chained him to a table built for something larger than a man. Angron knew immediately that it had been prepared in advance. That knowledge remained with him longer than almost anything else. The refusal had not created the punishment. The masters had expected refusal, perhaps wanted it. They had chosen the arena, chosen Ernemeus, chosen the public command because there was something they wished to test inside their most valuable beast. The chamber smelled of antiseptic, hot metal, and old blood. Articulated lamps lowered from the ceiling. Restraints closed around Angron's wrists, elbows, ankles, knees, throat, and torso, each fastening reinforced after the previous one, began to bend beneath his strength. Men in pale surgical garments moved around him without haste. They spoke about him as though he could not understand. Muscular response remains excessive. Increase restraint pressure. Cranial measurements confirmed. Begin preparation. Angron pulled against the table. Metal screamed. One of the technicians looked at the restraints rather than at him. Sedation? Another asked. The senior chirurgeon shook his head. Minimal. We require neurological response. Angron stared at him. Come closer. The man continued arranging his instruments. Why? Angron asked. So I can bite your face off. They shaved his scalp. That indignity was almost absurd beside what followed. Cool liquid washed across his skull. A marking stylus traced lines through the skin, while a technician consulted a projected anatomical image showing structures Angron had never known existed inside him. The High Riders did not understand what he was. Not truly. They knew his bones were denser than a man's, that his organs endured trauma no human body should survive, and that drugs behaved unpredictably in his blood. Their answer was not caution. It was stronger equipment. The first incision opened his scalp from behind one ear, across the back of his skull. Angron felt the blade part skin. Warm blood ran beneath his neck. Retractors pulled the wound wider. Then the cranial saw touched bone. The sound entered him before the pain did. A shrill mechanical vibration filled the chamber. Bone dust misted across the chirurgeon's masks. The blade struggled against the unnatural density of his skull, and the operator increased power. Angron roared and heaved upward. One restraint tore partly free from the table. Alarms sounded. Technicians stepped back. The chirurgeon did not. Additional anchoring. Steel arms descended over Angron's chest. Pneumatic pressure drove him flat. The saw resumed. Angron felt his skull opening by degrees, felt heat from the cutting instrument, felt blood collecting beneath his head. He tried to reach for the sound of Onomaus's voice in memory. Breathe. Watch the gates. Preserve strength. Pain is information. Do not waste yourself fighting pain. He repeated the lessons silently, while men opened his head. They showed him the device before implantation. Perhaps they believed that increased the punishment. It looked disappointingly small. A crown of blackened mechanisms lay upon a sterile tray, from which descended articulated filaments, metallic teeth, neural leads, and bundles of narrow cables. There was nothing mystical about it. No curse, no ritual, no demon waiting inside the machine. It was an instrument built by human hands to alter another human mind. The chirurgeon adjusted one of the probes. The cortical interface suppresses inhibitory response while stimulating aggression centers. Another technician studied Angron's readings. And compliance? Pain association provides reinforcement. Angron understood enough. They were going to make obedience hurt less than refusal. They were going to put the arena inside his skull. He began fighting the restraints again. This time there was fear in the technicians. Hold him. They drove the first probe into his brain. Angron ceased understanding the world. White swallowed everything. There was no chamber, no table, no body. There was only pain without location, a universe reduced to one impossible sensation. His back arched until the restraints bit through flesh. Blood sprayed from his mouth where his teeth closed through his tongue. Something entered deeper. Another probe followed, then another. Electrical impulses fired through nerves never meant to receive them. His limbs hammered against the table. A wrist broke beneath the restraint and healed crookedly enough that he tore it free before the technicians forced it down again. Voices surrounded him, calm and clinical. Response above projection. Lower the amplitude. No, continue. Cardiac activity unstable. It will survive. Not he. It. Angron tried to remember Onamaus. The nails hurt him for it. He saw the old man sitting beside him in darkness, explaining how to read the arena horns. Pain exploded behind Angron's eyes. He tried again. Onamaus giving away part of his ration. Pain. Onamaus laughing after Angron misunderstood a feint and landed face first in the sand. Pain. Onamaus placing one scarred hand against the back of Angron's neck and telling him that surviving did not mean belonging to the men who allowed him to survive. Pain. 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 Angron fled from the memories because thinking of them became unbearable. The instant anger replaced affection, something changed. The agony did not disappear, but it receded by the smallest degree. He imagined reaching through the restraints and crushing the chirurgeon's throat. Relief followed. He imagined driving his thumbs through the man's eyes. More relief. He imagined tearing the technicians apart, opening bellies, breaking jaws, smashing heads against the operating table until the room became red. The pain eased. Angron understood what they had done. No, he whispered. The nails answered. Agony drove through him. He screamed until his throat opened inside. When he woke, there was no peace in waking. He lay on stone in a recovery cage and discovered that stillness had become an enemy. Every heartbeat seemed to strike the machinery embedded through the back of his skull. Something mechanical pulsed beneath swollen flesh. Cables trailed against his neck. He heard his own breathing and hated the sound because every breath left enough room between moments for thought to begin. He tried to empty his mind. The nails punished emptiness. He tried to think of sleep. They punished that. He thought of Onamaus and nearly blacked out from the sudden neurological fire. Rage came reflexively. His fist struck the wall. Relief. He struck it again. Relief. Stone cracked beneath his knuckles. The nails rewarded him. Angron stared at the blood running over his hand and felt terror unlike anything the arena had ever taught him. Wounds had rules. Hunger had rules. An enemy had a body, and therefore places where that body could be broken. This thing was inside him. It had reached beneath every defense and found the place where thought became feeling. It could make gentleness hurt. It could make murder feel like mercy. Asti saw him first when the slaves were permitted past the recovery cages. The knife thief stopped speaking halfway through some complaint to Yokura. Clester came beside him. Larbadan stood farther back. Yokura's face changed when he saw the fresh scars and dark cables descending from Angron's skull. None of them made a joke. That frightened Angron almost as much as the nails. He gripped the bars. "Where is Onamaus?" No one answered. Angron struck the bars hard enough to bend them outward. "Where?" "Alive," Clester said. They kept him alive. The relief hurt. The nails drove agony down Angron's spine so fiercely that his knees struck the floor. Yokura swore and stepped toward him. Angron snarled. Yokura stopped. For the first time, one of his brothers looked afraid of him. The masters gave the implants time to settle before they tested their work. Not long. They had never been patient where entertainment was concerned. Angron measured the passing hours through pain and impacts. He learned that pacing dulled the ache slightly. Striking walls dulled it more. Breaking objects was better. When a handler entered the cage with food and raised a shock goad unnecessarily, Angron caught the man by the wrist and crushed every bone from fingers to elbow. The scream sent a chemical warmth through his skull. The nails quieted. Angron released the ruined limb in horror. The handler fell shrieking. Angron wanted him to scream again. That horrified him more. The arena summons came before his surgical wounds had closed. Handlers did not enter his cage this time. They opened doors from a distance and herded him with kin-guard weapons from behind reinforced barriers. Angron followed because movement was better than confinement. He heard the crowd before reaching the sand. His heart accelerated. The nails responded with a crawling anticipation that felt almost like hunger. The gate rose. Oenomaus waited in the arena. For one impossible instant, Angron felt joy. The nails turned it into fire. He doubled over, claws digging into his scalp. Blood ran around the implant ports. Across the sand, Oenomaus stared at him. Angron saw the older man understand immediately. Angron, his father's voice. Pain. Angron, look at me. Pain. Angron raised his head. Oenomaus carried a short spear and shield. He held both low. I know you are in there. Pain. Angron stumbled forward. Listen to me, boy. Pain. The crowd began chanting. Oenomaus backed away, not in fear. Angron knew his movements too well. The old gladiator was measuring distance, preserving room, trying to keep Angron alive by keeping himself alive. Do not give them what they want, the nails screamed. Angron charged. He crossed the arena faster than he had ever moved before. Sand exploded behind his feet. Oenomaus barely raised the shield in time. Angron struck it with his forearm. Wood and metal burst apart. The impact threw Oenomaus sideways. He rolled as he landed and brought the spear around defensively, exactly as he had taught Angron to recover from a fall. Angron caught the spearhead in his palm. It punched through his hand. The pain became pleasure because it arrived in violence. He pulled. Oenomaus released the weapon before Angron could drag him close. Good, Oenomaus breathed. You remembered. The word remembered almost stopped him. The nails punished hesitation. Angron roared and swung the spear. Oenomaus ducked beneath it. The shaft shattered against stone. Oenomaus drove one shoulder into Angron's ribs, not to injure him, but to redirect his momentum. It was a lesson Angron knew. Never oppose greater strength directly. Father teaching son even now. The thought detonated agony behind his eyes. Angron struck backward. His fist caught Oenomaus across the chest. Ribs broke. Angron heard them. Oenomaus flew across the sand and landed badly, coughing blood. The crowd rose as one. Angron wanted to stop. He tried. The nails burned. Oenomaus pushed himself upright on one arm. Blood ran from his mouth. Fight it. Angron took a step. No. Another. Angron. Another. Oenomaus reached for the broken spear. Angron was upon him before his fingers closed. He seized Oenomaus by the throat and lifted him. The old gladiator struck Angron's forearm once. There was no strength in it. Boy. The word reached somewhere the nails had not yet destroyed. Angron's grip loosened. Pain became everything. His hand closed again. He hurled Oenomaus into the ground. The older man struck hard enough for bone to crack beneath flesh. Blood burst from his mouth and nose. Angron fell upon him. His fist descended. Oenomaus turned his head, and the blow struck shoulder instead, pulverizing the joint. Another blow landed across the ribs. The chest collapsed inward. Broken bone punctured lung. Dark blood bubbled from Oenomaus's lips with each failing breath. Angron screamed at himself to stop. The nails translated the command into agony. He struck again. The sternum broke. Again. Something inside Oenomaus ruptured beneath the force. Again. Blood spread through the sand beneath the man who had raised him. Then Oenomaus lifted his remaining good hand and touched Angron's face. Not a blow, a touch. Angron froze. Oenomaus's eyes found his. There was pain there, enormous pain. There was no hatred. His lips moved. Angron leaned closer without knowing why. Whatever Oenomaus tried to say never became sound. The hand slipped from Angron's cheek. His father died. Awareness returned all at once. Angron looked down. His hands were red to the wrists. Oenomaus's chest no longer resembled a living man's chest. Splintered ribs pressed beneath torn flesh at angles ribs were never meant to take. Blood flooded the cratered sand around his torso. One eye stared sightlessly upward, while the other remained half-closed. The mouth that had mocked Angron, instructed him, cursed him, and called him boy was filled with blood. Angron touched Eunomaus' face. Nothing. He waited. Nothing. The arena erupted. The cheering hit him harder than any weapon ever had. Thousands screamed their pleasure. High riders stood in their galleries and applauded. Servants refilled drinking vessels. Men embraced because wagers had been won. Women leaned over balcony rails to see the corpse more clearly. Somewhere a horn sounded in celebration. Angron looked at his father's body, then at his hands, then upward. Something inside him ceased asking whether the masters deserved to die. The question had become insulting. They had taken obedience and made it a knife. They had opened his skull because he refused to murder the man he loved. They had placed machinery inside his mind and forced his own strength to become the executioner's weapon. They had not merely killed Eunomaus, they had made Angron kill him, and then they had cheered. The nails began biting again. Angron welcomed the pain. He rose. The nearest handler never saw him cross the distance. Angron caught the man beneath the jaw and drove him head first into the arena wall. The skull burst against stone. A kin guard fired. Energy burned across Angron's shoulder. He kept moving. His hand closed around the soldier's helm and crushed until metal folded, bone fragmented, and blood jetted through the visor seams. Another soldier tried to retreat. Angron tore the weapon from his hands and drove its stock through his face. The nails quieted. That was their final lesson. Violence was relief. Peace was punishment. By the time the masters stopped him, the arena gates were streaked with blood, and 3 more bodies lay around Eunomaus. Machinery dragged Angron down again. Shockfire hammered through him. He barely felt it. His eyes remained upon the galleries until darkness swallowed the arena. Later, somewhere beneath Deshea, Angron awoke chained upright in a cell. Dried blood covered his arms. Some belonged to guards. Most belonged to the man who had taught him the difference between killing and obedience. The other slaves were silent beyond the bars. At last a voice whispered from the darkness. They broke him. Angron opened his eyes. The nails pulsed inside his skull. No, he said. Chains shifted as men and women turned toward him. Angron looked through the darkness at Clester, Yokura, Asti, Larbaden, and every other shadow listening from behind iron. They taught me. No one spoke. Angron pulled once against his restraints. The anchor bolts groaned inside the wall. They taught me what they are. He pulled again. Stone cracked around the bolts. And now we kill the men who own us. Time beneath Deshea did not pass cleanly after Eunomaus died. It accumulated in layers of blood, scar tissue, and remembered screams. Angron stopped measuring it by days, because the pits belonged to men who counted days. He measured it by changes in the guards, by which handlers had begun favoring one leg after old injuries, by how often the kin guard changed posts at the southern gate, by which armorer drank too much before the late arena bouts, and which chirurgeon left the medical stores unlatched when called to an emergency. Every contest became instruction. Every punishment became reconnaissance. Every procession through the underworks showed him another door, another lock, another passage connecting holding cells to preparation chambers, armories, kitchens, service tunnels, and beast pens. The nails had not made him blind. The masters wanted rage because rage entertained them, and so they mistook violence for stupidity. Angron encouraged the mistake. He broke men in the arena. He roared when the pain behind his eyes demanded it. He smashed walls when handlers expected spectacle. While they congratulated themselves for making him savage, he counted steps between gates. The butcher's nails never slept. They pulsed through the back of his skull while he ate, while he stood in darkness, while another fighter whispered plans through cracks between cells. Calm remained a form of punishment. The implants bit deepest when nothing demanded his attention, turning reflection into a tightening wire drawn through the meat of his brain. Angron learned to think while moving. He paced when he needed to remember. He flexed his hands when he needed to reason. When the pain grew worse, he struck the walls until his knuckles opened, and the brief chemical warmth of violence softened the agony enough for another thought to survive. The High Riders had attempted to make thinking impossible. Angron adapted. He had been designed for adaptation, though neither he nor the men who owned him understood why. Yokura adapted with him. The chain fighter had always possessed a craftsman's understanding of links, hooks, and leverage, but now Angron watched him turn that knowledge away from the arena and toward war. Yokura demonstrated in the darkness between bouts, looping chain around a wooden post meant to support bedding racks. Armor means nothing if the man inside still needs a neck, he muttered, tightening the links beneath an imaginary helm. Hook here, brace the foot, turn the hips. Do not pull with the arms unless you want the bastard's weight to take you with him. He twisted. The wooden post cracked. Angron watched. Kinguard gorgets cover the throat. Then I take the knee first. Yokura shifted the chain lower, snapped it around the post, and yanked sideways. Men fall the same whether they wear silk or plate. Asti, crouched nearby, said, "Everything falls if you hit it correctly." Yokura looked at him. "That is not wisdom." It sounded like wisdom. It sounded like something a man says before being stabbed. Asti smiled. "Then I should know it well." Asti had become a problem the guards could not solve. They searched him before bouts, after bouts, before meals, and sometimes merely because they disliked his face. They found knives often enough to believe the searches worked. That was the brilliance of it. Asti surrendered one blade so they would stop looking for the second, the third, or the shard of sharpened metal sewn beneath the lining of his belt. He could steal from men while insulting them. Once he returned from an equipment inspection with a Kinguard locking pin hidden beneath his tongue and a narrow armorer's cutter taped against his thigh. Clester threatened to break his fingers if he ever stole from her. Asti replied that he would never insult her by being caught. Clester answered by driving the butt of her shriek spear between his knees hard enough to fold him over. Larbaden watched from the floor while tightening bandages around a wound in his ribs and remarked, "Now he has somewhere else to hide the knives." Asti took several breaths before whispering, "All of you are animals." Larbaden was worse in his own fashion. Injuries did not convince him to stop. They merely changed the way he fought. A torn calf meant he shortened his stance. A cracked rib meant he stopped twisting from the waist. When a hooked blade opened his forearm to the bone, he wrapped the wound until his fingers could close again and returned to formation before the chirurgeon finished threatening him. "You will lose the limb if the wound rots," Clester told him. Larbaden inspected the bandage as though discussing another man's arm. "Then I will carry less weight." Angron stared at him until Larbaden looked up. "What? You are an idiot. From you, that is high praise." Angron almost struck him. The nails flared at the irritation, flooding his skull with hot needles, and his hand closed around Larbaden's shoulder harder than he intended. Larbaden's expression changed. For several heartbeats, Angron did not know why. His fingers were crushing flesh. He released him. No one spoke. The silence was worse than accusation. Angron looked at his hand as if it belonged to a stranger. The nails throbbed. Rage offered relief, urging him to turn embarrassment into violence, to punish Larbaden for making him feel anything except anger. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. "Angron," Clester said. He heard her. "Angron." He looked at her. The shriek spear rested against her shoulder, but she had not raised it. Yokura had taken one slow step to the side. Asti's hands were empty, which meant they were not. Larbaden remained where he was, breathing carefully. "I am here," Angron said. "Yes," Clester answered. "You are." Nothing else. No apology was demanded. No one pretended nothing had happened. That became their method. When the nails took seconds from him, they gave him his name. Sometimes Jokura shouted it. Sometimes Asti risked a joke. Clester used the flat certainty with which she announced an opponent's weakness. Larbaden once slapped Angron across the face and very nearly died for the effort. Angron came back to himself with one hand around Larbaden's throat and found the stubborn bastard grinning through purple lips. "There," Larbaden rasped. "Knew you were still in there." Angron dropped him. Larbaden spent several minutes coughing and then asked for food. They became brothers and sisters because no other word carried enough weight. The masters called them stock, fighters, assets, property, and animals. The arena heralds gave them titles shaped for applause. None mattered. Brother mattered. Sister mattered. No one saluted Angron. No one called him Lord. When Jokura knew something Angron did not, Jokura spoke, and Angron listened. When Clester understood a formation better, she took the front. When Asti found a lock he could defeat, no one argued because his hands moved faster than their pride. Authority lasted only as long as usefulness. Angron became their center, not because he demanded command, but because whenever a gate opened and death came through it, he stepped toward the danger rather than away. The masters noticed the cohesion before they understood it. Their answer was an arena engagement intended to break it. Angron entered the sand with Clester, Jokura, Larbaden, Asti, and several others against a formation twice their number. The opposing fighters wore partial plate and carried long spears, short blades, and weighted nets. Behind them, raised platforms held handlers with shock staves and projectile weapons meant to keep the combat moving. The arrangement was theatrical cruelty disguised as competition. Angron saw the design immediately. The armored line would hold them at distance. Nets would isolate individuals. Anyone retreating would be driven back by the handlers. "Left side is weak," Clester said without looking at him. "Two nets behind them," Jokura added. Asti rolled one shoulder. "I hate nets." "You hate bathing," Larbaden said. "I hate many things." The signal sounded. The spear line advanced. Angron did not charge. The crowd jeered. That pleased him. "Hold," he said. The gladiators waited until the spear points were close enough to see dried oil on the steel. Then Clester moved first. Her shriek spear snapped outward, the mechanism beneath its head emitting a metallic howl as she knocked one enemy spear aside and opened the wielder's cheek from mouth to ear. Jokura cast his chain low, caught another man behind the ankle, and tore him off balance. Angron stepped into the gap before the line could close. A spear entered his shoulder. He ignored it, seized the shaft, dragged the man forward, and headbutted him hard enough to collapse the front of his skull. Bone fragments punched inward. Blood sprayed across Angron's face. The dead man had not reached the ground before Angron threw his body sideways into two others. The arena became close work. That was where the Pitborn belonged. A net dropped over Larbaden. Instead of struggling free, he charged beneath it and wrapped both himself and the net fighter together, turning the restraint into a shared prison. He bit through the man's nose when their faces collided. Jokura's chain flashed past them and caught an armored opponent beneath the chin. He turned, braced, and pulled. The gorget held. The neck did not. Vertebrae shifted with a series of dull cracks, and the man's legs collapsed while Jokura continued hauling until blood ran beneath the helmet rim. Clester kept three fighters beyond knife reach with the shriek spear, every thrust accompanied by that mechanical shriek. Asti vanished beneath a tangle of bodies and emerged on the far side holding a knife no one had seen him carry. He drove it behind one fighter's knee, climbed the man's back as he fell, and buried the blade through the gap below the ear. The handlers opened fire when the contest turned too quickly. A projectile struck one of Angron's brothers in the back and burst through his chest in a fan of blood and rib fragments. Another round tore through a thigh, nearly removing the leg. The crowd cheered because the balance had been restored. Angron looked up at the platform. The nails sang. He could have climbed to them. He could already imagine the handlers' bodies breaking beneath his hands. "Angron!" Clester shouted. He turned. A wounded gladiator lay beneath an opponent, raising a spear for the killing thrust. Angron crossed the distance and struck the spearman from the side. The man's body bent around Angron's forearm. Ribs snapped beneath armor. The spine broke somewhere in the collision, and the fighter fell as a loose arrangement of limbs. The wounded slave stared up at him. "Can you stand?" Angron asked. "Yes." It was a lie. "Good. Stand anyway." The fighter did. They won because they refused to die separately. It was not elegance. It was not the drilled precision of kin guard formations. It was the savage competence of people accustomed to continuing after exhaustion should have ended them. They fought with blood-filling boots, with broken fingers taped around weapon grips, with lungs punctured and joints dislocated. Every injury that might shock a free soldier into collapse was merely another condition the pit-born already knew how to survive. When the last opposing fighter fell, Angron did not permit the killing of those who had dropped weapons. A handler shouted down, "Finish them." Angron looked upward. No. The crowd began to boo. One of the defeated gladiators stared at him. "They will punish you. They punish me when I obey." The handler raised his weapon. Angron smiled. "Come down and do it yourself." The handler did not. That night, the surviving fighters received reduced food for disappointing the masters. Angron shared his ration among the wounded. The nails punished him while he sat still, so he paced as they ate. Jokura watched him cross the cell for perhaps the 100th time. "We cannot stay." "No," Angron said. Asti licked grease from his fingers. "A revelation. We cannot only leave." That silenced him. Clester leaned forward. Angron continued pacing. "If we break these cages and run, they hunt us. If they catch us, they bring us back. If they cannot catch us, they punish everyone who remains. The pits continue. New slaves take our places. New children bleed on the same sand." Jokura's chain shifted softly in his hands. "What are you saying?" Clester asked. Angron stopped. The nails bit. He began moving again. "I am saying escape is not enough." Labadan grunted. "Then say what is." "We open every cage we can reach." Asti's smile faded. "We take the armory," Angron continued. "Food stores, medical stores, anything that fires, anything that cuts. We kill the kin guard who bar the roads. We kill the handlers who know the tunnels. We kill the masters who send men after us." Jokura stared at him. "That is not escape." "No, that is war." "Yes." The word sat among them. War, not riot, not flight, not another arena bout performed beneath someone else's gaze. War. Clester looked toward the bars. "We do not know how to use half their weapons." "Then we learn on the men carrying them," Angron said. Asti nodded slowly. "The armory lock is double-keyed. You can open it. I can open one side. The other requires a guard key." Jokura lifted his chain. "Keys are easier to take from men who cannot breathe." The plan grew in fragments, because none of them possessed the luxury of maps spread across tables. Asti knew which armorers carried cutters. Clester knew the beast passages connected with an old service corridor behind the southern preparation hall. Jokura knew the late guard rotation paused near the water stores because 2 kin guards smoked there where officers could not see them. Labadan knew wounded fighters were moved through a treatment passage with fewer armed escorts because the masters considered half-dead slaves incapable of revolt. Angron knew response times. He had counted them through every manufactured outburst. A disturbance in the eastern cells brought handlers first. Kin guard arrived later. The armory detail sealed its doors before reinforcing the pens. That meant the first minutes mattered more than any heroics afterward. Their arsenal began with things small enough to hide. Asti distributed sharpened metal slivers. Jokura loosened links from training chains and replaced the damaged joins so handlers would not notice. Clester showed 2 trusted fighters how to turn broken spear shafts into stabbing weapons. Labadan stole bandage wire strong enough to cut flesh when twisted around a throat. Angron carried nothing. He did not need to. He warned them about the guns. "Every weapon we take means one less man firing at us," he said. "Do not waste time admiring them. Kill the bearer. Take it. If you know how it works, use it. If you do not, give it to someone who does." "And if none of us do?" Asti asked. "Use it as a club." Asti smiled. "Finally, strategy I understand." The rebellion spread cell by cell, whisper by whisper. Not everyone joined. Some were too frightened. Some believed the High Riders unbeatable. Others had children, injured brothers, or debts of loyalty inside the pits they could not abandon. Angron did not threaten them. Freedom taken at knife point was only another kind of ownership. One old fighter asked him, "And if we fail?" Angron looked through the bars at the man. The nails pulsed. "We probably will." No one laughed. The High Riders have cities, soldiers, guns, food enough to wait while we starve. They may kill every one of us. The old fighter swallowed. Angron stepped closer. "But if they kill me outside this cage, they kill a free man." Silence. That is enough. It was the first shape his philosophy ever took. Not victory, not empire, not conquest. Choice. A man could lose and still deny his master the final word. The night they chose came without ceremony. No speech passed through the cells. No banner was raised. No oath was spoken before assembled ranks. Men and women slept, pretended to sleep, or sat in darkness, listening for the pattern of boots beyond the bars. Asti waited beside Angron's cell. Yokura stood farther down the row, chain hidden beneath his bedding. Clester watched through half-closed eyes. Labadan sat with his back against the wall, one hand wrapped around sharpened metal. The guard came at the expected hour. He was alone. He stopped outside Angron's cell and frowned at the giant sitting motionless against the far wall. "You," the guard said. "Up." Angron did not move. The guard cursed, drew the key and opened the door. He stepped inside. Asti moved behind him. The door closed. There was a wet, choking sound. Then the guard's keys struck the stone. The guard died before he understood that the rebellion had begun. Yokura's chain came over his throat from behind, the links biting beneath the jaw where the gorget did not cover, while Asti caught the man's weapon arm and drove a sharpened sliver through the soft tissue inside the elbow. The guard opened his mouth, but Yokura turned his hips and pulled, strangling the cry into a wet grunt. Angron rose from the darkness and caught the man before his boots could drum against the floor. For several heartbeats the guard thrashed between them, armor scraping stone, fingers clawing uselessly at the chain, crushing his windpipe. Then cartilage collapsed beneath the links. Blood ran from his nostrils. His eyes bulged. Yokura maintained pressure until the body went slack. Asti was already stripping keys from the belt. "South pens first," Angron whispered. "Then the preparation halls." The nails pulsed behind his eyes, exulting in the fresh violence, but he forced himself to think through it. Silence still mattered. Every dead guard bought them seconds. Every second meant another opened cage before Deshia understood its property had learned to bite. Asti slid the key into the next lock. Clester emerged carrying nothing more than a sharpened length of metal. Labadan followed, binding the dead guard's sidearm beneath a strip of cloth, because none of them yet trusted themselves to fire it without advertising their position. Yokura unwound the chain from the corpse's throat. The guard sagged face first onto the stones. His keys did not strike the floor a second time. They moved through the confinement row like a knife beneath skin. Asti opened doors. Yokura silenced men. Clester took the first sentry at the junction by driving her improvised spike through the side of his neck and holding him upright while his blood emptied down her forearm. Labadan caught another guard's shock stave in both hands, accepted the electrical discharge with a hiss of pain, and smashed the man's wrist against the wall until the weapon fell loose. Angron killed only when necessary, because the first alarm would transform every narrow passage into a gun barrel pointed at them. He seized one kin guard by the back of the helmet and drove the faceplate into stone once, twice, then a third time until lacquered armor gave way and red matter spilled from the visor. He lowered the corpse rather than allowing it to fall. No roar, no challenge. The nails hated restraint and punished him for it, needling deeper every moment he refused the release they promised. But Angron had learned something the High Riders never intended him to learn. Pain could be endured for purpose. They had taught him to suffer for their amusement. Now he suffered for his brothers and sisters. The first holding area opened without resistance. Men and women emerged, blinking into the weak lumen glow, some already armed with fragments of metal, others too injured to stand without help. One prisoner stared at Angron as if freedom itself had assumed human shape. "Is this real?" he whispered. "Until they kill us," Angron answered. "Then move." There was no speech, no promise, no declaration that the world had changed. The rebels spread according to what they had discussed in darkness. Those who could fight followed Yochura toward the preparation chambers. Asti took 3 quick-handed pit slaves toward the armory passage. Clester moved for the weapon racks. Labadan gathered the wounded who could still carry something sharp. Others remained against the walls, paralyzed by the sight of open doors. Angron did not shame them. Years of obedience did not evaporate because a lock turned. One man began weeping. Another crawled back, inside his own cell, and curled beneath the stone sleeping ledge. Freedom was a door. It was not a hand capable of forcing someone through. The first alarm came from the eastern junction. A handler rounded the corner, saw half a dozen open cages, and inhaled to shout. Clester's stolen shock stave struck him in the throat before sound emerged. The man fell choking, but not before his hand slapped the wall panel beside him. Red lumens ignited along the ceiling. A mechanical klaxon began hammering through Deshia. Every door in the underworks seemed to move at once. Bulk shutters descended. Kin guards shouted through adjoining corridors. Somewhere above, the arena bells changed their pattern from spectacle to emergency. Angron felt the entire structure wake around them. "Now," he said. Yochura's group charged the preparation hall. Clester tore a shriek spear from the rack before the armorer could reach the alarm there. Its mechanism screamed the instant she drove it through his chest. The blade entered above the sternum and burst from his back, trailing blood. She planted a foot against him and kicked the corpse free. "Missed that noise," she said. Asti appeared with an armory key in one hand and a knife in the other. "North door is sealed. Then open the south. That requires the other key." Angron looked toward the reinforced gate barring it. "Not anymore." He struck the gate at the lock housing. Metal buckled. The second blow tore bolts from masonry. The third collapsed the mechanism inward with a shriek of tortured iron. Angron wrapped both hands around the bent frame and pulled until the gate came free of its track. The rebels stared. Even after years in the pits, some had never seen him use his full strength against something meant not to move. He cast the gate aside and entered the armory passage as kin guard fire erupted from the far end. Automatic rounds hammered the walls. Stone burst into dust. A slave behind Angron jerked backward as 3 projectiles struck his chest in rapid succession, the impacts opening fist-sized cavities through flesh and spraying the men behind him with blood, lung tissue, and splinters of rib. Another round struck a woman through the face and removed the back of her skull in a red sheet. Subtlety died there. Angron seized the ruined gate from the floor, turned it sideways, and raised it as a shield. Bullets rang against the metal. Energy fire burned glowing wounds through it. "Behind me," he growled. They advanced through the corridor under a storm of gunfire. The torn gate jumped in Angron's hands with every impact. Heat washed across his face, where laser bolts burned through the iron. Yochura and Clester pressed close behind him, dragging survivors into the narrow shelter of the barrier. Men fell anyway. A shot penetrated the gate and entered a slave's abdomen, punching through bowel and spine before burying itself in the wall. He collapsed screaming, intestines spilling between his hands. Labadan caught him beneath the arms and dragged him toward cover. "Leave me," the wounded man gasped. "Shut up," Labadan said. The corridor ahead narrowed where the kin guard had overturned equipment carts into a barricade. Muzzles flashed above them. Angron counted the rhythm of the automatic fire without knowing the weapon's name. Bursts. Pause. Bursts. Pause. Men had to feed machines ammunition. Machines had limits. The High Riders had made him learn patience by trying to beat it out of him. The next pause came. Angron threw the gate. The slab of twisted iron crossed the corridor like a siege projectile. It struck the barricade and the men behind it with enough force to collapse the entire position. One kin guard disappeared beneath the metal, with a scream cut short by the weight crushing his chest. Another tried to rise. Angron reached him before the rifle came level. He caught the weapon in one hand, bent the barrel aside, and drove his forehead into the soldier's helm. The faceplate caved inward. Blood flooded from beneath the chin guard. Angron tore the rifle free and hurled the corpse into two more soldiers, pushing forward from the rear. Jochura followed, chains circling overhead, before snapping around a kin guard ankle. He pulled. The soldier fell onto his back. Clester's shriek spear entered through the narrow joint beneath his arm and burst from the opposite shoulder in a spray of blood. Asti slid beneath the fallen barricade, opened the throat of a stunned guard, and snatched the dead man's sidearm before he finished convulsing. "This end points away from me?" he shouted. "Usually," Jochura answered. Asti fired. The first shot burned a crater into the ceiling. The second struck a guard in the hip. Improving. The armory fell by violence measured in breaths. Once inside, the rebels found racks of automatic weapons, energy carbines, shock staves, helmets, shields and ammunition stored with the complacency of men who had never imagined slaves would reach them alive. They armed themselves unevenly. Pit fighters knew blades, chains and spears far better than firearms, but some had watched guards long enough to understand magazines, safeties and charge indicators. Others learned through mistakes. One man discharged a weapon into the floor and nearly removed his own foot. Clester cuffed him hard enough to send him sprawling. "Point it at the masters before you touch anything." Angron did not take a gun. He tore a heavy cleaver from a ceremonial rack and tested its balance once. The blade had been made for spectacle, broad enough to impress a crowd and heavy enough to cripple a normal fighter after prolonged use. In his hand, it felt almost weightless. Jochura found reinforced chain. Asti acquired so many knives that even Angron stopped asking where he intended to put them. They opened the remaining pens as they moved. The rebellion doubled, then doubled again. Not everyone became a warrior. Some prisoners staggered out carrying children from labor cages. Some were ancient men whose hands had been broken too many times to close around weapons. Some were arena casualties, preserved only because a patron had not yet decided whether they remained valuable. Angron ordered the walking wounded paired with those unable to move quickly. No one stays because they cannot fight. A slave with one eye and a fresh amputation stared at him. Why? Angron looked at the holding pens behind them. Because that is what the masters would do. The answer traveled through the group faster than any command. Men lifted men they barely knew. Women tore bedding into slings. Those capable of killing formed around the helpless, without being told. It was not an army yet. It was something older. A pack turning outward around its wounded. The upper levels proved harder. Kinguard had enough time to establish firing lanes along the broad service corridors, leading toward the arena concourses. Grenades bounced from corners. The first detonation tore 4 rebels apart. One body struck Angron from behind without a head. Another man remained standing for a moment, with both legs shredded below the knees, before gravity took him. Smoke filled the passage with pulverized stone and blood mist. The slaves answered by refusing to remain where the guns expected them. Asti found maintenance doors. Clester led fighters through beast passages too narrow for shield formations. Jokura strangled a sentry behind a ventilation stack and took his rifle. Larbadan used captured shields to advance from buttress to buttress, timing movement between bursts. Angron went where resistance was strongest. A laser struck him through the chest and burned a hole deep enough that a mortal man's heart would have been cooked inside his ribs. He staggered, smelled his own flesh charring, and kept moving. Another shot burned through his thigh. He limped for 3 steps, then accelerated. The kin guard behind the next barricade saw him coming and broke discipline. Some fired too quickly, others backed away. Angron overturned the barricade with both hands and came over it with the cleaver. The first soldier lost an arm at the shoulder. The blade continued through armor, collarbone and neck before stopping inside the chest. Angron kicked the corpse free. The second guard raised his weapon. Angron caught him by the breastplate and slammed him against the wall hard enough to burst organs inside his torso. Blood erupted through the man's teeth. A third fired point blank into Angron's abdomen. The blast burned flesh black and opened the muscles beneath. Angron looked down at the wound, then at the soldier. The kin guard had enough time to understand that his weapon had failed to produce the expected universe. Angron grabbed his helmet with both hands and twisted. The neck broke. He continued turning until skin tore, and the head came free, trailing blood, vertebrae and cords of tissue. The rebels saw it. Fear changed direction. The High Riders had built an arena beast, taught it murder, carved rage into its brain, and surrounded it with thousands of others who had spent their lives learning how to kill while wounded. Then, they had kept all of them beneath the same city. Deshea began burning before they reached the streets. Asti claimed responsibility for one fire. Jochura suspected he was lying. It no longer mattered. Smoke rolled through the arena galleries as freed slaves emerged from the underworks into places they had known only from below. Spectators and servants fled from them. Some civilians froze in horror because every official proclamation had described pit fighters as mindless animals, and now those animals moved in groups, carried their wounded and attacked guards rather than slaughtering everyone they saw. A richly dressed man stumbled from a doorway and raised both hands. Jochura moved toward him. Angron caught the chain fighter's shoulder. Not him. Jochura stared. High Rider. Unarmed. So were we. Angron's jaw tightened as the nails rewarded the thought of murder. We kill the men who put chains on us, not everyone who happens to stand above the pits. Jochura studied him, then lowered the chain. The civilian ran. Others were less fortunate. An overseer recognized 3 escaped slaves and ordered guards to seize them. Angron crossed the concourse before the sentence finished. He caught the overseer by his elaborate coat and threw him through the barred window of a punishment chamber. Glass and metal entered the man's body together. He fell inside the room, impaled through the abdomen, screaming as his own weight opened the wound wider. Angron tore the chamber doors from their hinges. Inside, prisoners hung from restraints beneath instruments meant to humiliate rather than kill. He freed them personally. Then he broke the punishment apparatus until nothing remained capable of holding a human body. The revolt spread into the adjoining districts. Kin Guard squads gave way to organized military units summoned from garrisons beyond the arena precinct. Their discipline changed the battle immediately. They did not chase individual slaves into alleys. They established intersections, controlled avenues, used overlapping fields of fire, and advanced behind armored vehicles. Grenades cleared buildings before infantry entered. The rebels could not meet them on open streets. Angron learned that lesson after one group tried and disappeared beneath disciplined gunfire in moments, bodies collapsing in rows before they crossed half the distance. He pulled the survivors back himself. No more streets, he snarled. Make them come inside. The city became their second arena. They moved through kitchens, workshops, slave passages, drainage conduits, and service galleries, invisible to the ruling classes who had lived above them. Small kin guard formations vanished inside buildings. Supply carts were seized. Ammunition was stripped from corpses. Food stores were opened and distributed without permission from anyone. When armored transports entered narrow market roads, rebels dropped masonry from upper levels or trapped them behind burning wagons and attacked crews forced to dismount. Every captured weapon taught another lesson. Every liberated holding pen added bodies. Every dead overseer erased a little of the system that had once seemed eternal. By nightfall, they reached a terrace high enough to see half of Deshia below. Fires burned across the arena district. Smoke climbed into the evening sky. The great pit where Angron had killed for strangers was hidden beneath black columns of ash. Around him stood hundreds of freed slaves, bloodied, exhausted, and armed with the spoils of men who had expected them to remain property forever. Some still wore collars. Others dragged lengths of chain behind them because there had been no time to cut the shackles away. A man near Angron asked, "What happens now?" Angron looked over the burning city. "We move." "Where?" "Wherever they keep our people." "And after that?" Angron turned. "We open the cages." The man swallowed. "And if they come for us?" Angron looked toward the roads beyond Deshea. "Then we kill them." No constitution followed, no promise of a better order. Angron had nothing to offer except movement, blood, and the refusal to kneel again. Clester joined him at the terrace edge. "You should see this." Far beyond the burning districts, lights moved along the outer roads. Not civilian traffic, columns. Armored vehicles advanced beneath military lamps. Infantry transports followed in ordered lines. More lights appeared behind them, then more again, converging upon Deshea from beyond the city. Jotura came beside them with his chain dark from throat blood. Asti stood on Angron's other side, for once without a joke. Larbadan limped up last and stared at the approaching forces. Their escape had succeeded. Angron smiled. Their war had begun. News outran armies on Nuceria. It traveled through irrigation crews and mine gangs, through freight depots where bonded laborers loaded high-rider wealth onto armored transports, through kitchens where servants carried wine to men discussing the destruction of Deshia as though the burning arena had been a failed harvest. The masters called what had happened a riot, then an escape, then a criminal insurrection. Each new name arrived after the previous lie had already failed. Slaves heard something simpler. Angron lived. The pit fighters had broken Deshea. The cages had opened. Kin guard had died in their armor, and the men who had watched others bleed for amusement had discovered that walls could be breached from below. By the time the first High Rider proclamation promised exemplary punishment for anyone sheltering fugitives, labor compounds beyond the city were already missing workers. Some fled alone and were found hanging from roadside gantries. Others murdered overseers, opened storehouses, and disappeared into the hinterlands carrying food, tools, and whatever weapons they could steal. When they found Angron, they did not kneel. That was the first thing he demanded of them. "Stand," he told men who approached him on their knees. "If you wanted another master, you should have stayed where you were." The rebellion grew faster than it could feed itself. Hundreds became more. More mouths meant more hunger, more wounds, more children and cripples who could not march at the pace required to remain ahead of the kin guard. Every captured rifle produced another fighter and another need for ammunition. Every liberated labor camp gave them hands familiar with machines, but added bodies to a column that could be seen from ridgelines. Angron learned logistics because starvation refused to care that he was stronger than any man alive. Food had to be taken before armies could burn it. Water had to be found before a march. Wounded fighters slowed everyone unless carts could be stolen. Charge packs had to be separated from projectile ammunition because too many former arena slaves still treated every unfamiliar weapon as though anger alone could make it function. Asti became insufferably proud after learning how to strip a captured autogun without firing it into himself. Jochura watched him reassemble the weapon and said, "You look disappointed." Asti seated the magazine. "I preferred when guns were mysterious." "Why?" "Mysteries cannot be blamed on me when they explode." Labadan, limping beside them with an arm bound from wrist to shoulder, grunted. "Everything can be blamed on you." Clesta rested the butt of her shriek spear against the earth. "Including hunger. I have stolen enough food for all of you. You ate half of it." Asti looked offended. "That is how I verified it was safe." Angron allowed the laughter because it helped them march. The Nails hated it. They hated everything that was not bloodshed, sending hot filaments of pain into his skull whenever moments of peace lasted too long. He learned to endure the agony while maps were scratched into dirt with knife tips. The rebels possessed no strategium, no officers educated in formal war, no orbital augurs, and no Vox network spanning their columns. They had memory. Laborers knew service roads ignored by the high riders. Mine slaves knew tunnels beneath fortified estates. Sanitation crews knew runoff channels wide enough for men to crawl through. Arena fighters knew exactly how quickly disciplined courage became panic when a man carrying a gun suddenly discovered an enemy close enough to bite him. Angron understood the principle instinctively. High rider soldiers dominated distance. Therefore, distance was the enemy. Every wall, alley, conduit, smoke cloud, collapsed building, and blind corner became a weapon because it shortened the space between gun and blade. "Never fight the weapon," Wenamaus had once told him. "Fight the man carrying it." Angron still heard the dead man's voice sometimes. The Nails punished him for remembering. He remembered anyway. The city chosen for their next attack did not need a name. The High Riders had built hundreds of places like it and believed each unique because different families owned the towers. To Angron, it was stone around cages. The stronghold occupied a shelf of high ground above an industrial basin, its outer districts protected by walls, controlled approach roads, and defensive towers overlooking the plains. Freight crawlers entered through fortified gates, carrying ore and food from surrounding estates. Kinguard barracks stood near the western quarter. The ruling precinct occupied the upper terraces, behind another ring of walls, where administrative palaces and private compounds looked down upon labor districts packed between manufactories. To attack directly was to run through overlapping fields of fire until nothing remained except bodies. Angron proposed attacking directly. Clesta stared at him across the rough map. "You are either cleverer than I thought, or exactly as stupid as I thought." Angron pointed to the strongest gate. "They know I am coming. Everyone knows you are coming. They know where they expect me." Jochura understood first. "The main gate." Angron nodded. "They will put every gun they trust there." Asti tapped 3 marks along the city's southern industrial wall, which leaves men they trust less here. A liberated maintenance worker, old enough that his hands shook when he was not gripping tools, indicated a drainage conduit beneath one manufactorum. This reaches the cooling galleries, grating at the far end, steel, but old. Another laborer knew a freight lift that bypassed the inner wall. A third had serviced power relays beneath the eastern defense towers and knew which junctions fed their targeting optics. Angron listened to all of them. He gave no speech about destiny. "Break those," he told the laborers. "Open what you can. Kill anyone who closes it again." He looked to Clesta. "Take the south." To Jochura, Western Service Road. Asti opened his mouth. "You go with Jochura." I had not complained. "You were about to." "I was going to volunteer." Labadan snorted. Angron turned toward the distant walls. "I take the gate." They approached before dawn, beneath a sky the color of old iron. The city had already sounded its alarms. Defense lumens burned along the walls. Kin guards stood in ranks behind firing ports, while heavier weapons tracked across the open ground below.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Angron walked ahead of several hundred rebels carrying shields, scavenged from security depots, armored vehicle plating, and even sections of industrial machinery torn apart for cover. No banner moved above them. They had no symbol yet. The first lass fire arrived while the eastern horizon was still dark. Beams cut through morning mist and struck shields with bursts of white heat. One slave's improvised plate glowed, softened, and folded inward against his chest. He screamed as metal fused to skin. Automatic weapons joined the barrage. Projectiles struck earth in stitched lines, kicked fragments from stone, and hammered bodies backward. A man beside Angron lost the upper half of his head. The skull opened from brow to crown and collapsed in a spray of blood, grey tissue, and shattered teeth that spattered Angron's shoulder. He kept walking. "Faster," he growled. The rebels ran. The gate became a furnace. Men died around Angron with such frequency that the living had to leap over bodies while still under fire. A grenade burst among the shield carriers and turned 4 into a single red confusion of limbs. One fighter landed on his back, with his abdomen opened from groin to sternum, intestines spilling in steaming coils across the earth. He tried to gather them with both hands, while screaming for a brother already dead beside him. Angron stepped over them and felt the nails bloom with pleasure at the slaughter. He hated the implants almost as much as he hated the men upon the wall. Another las beam struck his shoulder and cooked a furrow through muscle. A projectile hit him beneath the ribs and buried itself somewhere inside. He did not slow. The defenders saw a giant coming through, enough fire to annihilate ordinary men, and began concentrating upon him exactly as he had intended. Elsewhere, the city opened from within. The Southern Maintenance Party emerged into a cooling gallery and murdered 2 sentries before either raised an alarm. Clester's shriek spear punched through the first man's throat, the weapon screaming as its vibrating mechanism tore the wound wider. The second turned and received a stolen blade beneath the jaw from a laborer who had spent 20 years repairing machinery owned by the dead man's masters. Jochura's fighters cut through the Western Service Road after Asti opened a utility gate with tools, stolen keys, and profanity. The High Riders had guarded streets better than drains. They had fortified plazas better than slave tunnels. They had designed their city to resist armies from outside and forgotten that thousands already living inside knew where its bones were thin. Angron reached the main gate beneath a storm of fire. The rebels with him had dwindled terribly. That too was part of the plan, though no plan made their deaths easier to look upon. A fighter with both legs ruined crawled behind the shield line, dragging a captured rifle by its sling. When a Kinguard soldier appeared above the gatehouse parapet, the crawling man rolled onto one hip, fired 3 times, and fell dead before seeing whether he had hit anything. One shot struck the defender through the throat. The Kinguard toppled over the wall and landed among the rebels with his weapon still in his hands. Another dying slave seized the corpse by the ankle and screamed, "Take the gun!" before a second burst chewed through his spine. Survival had ceased to be the rebellion's measure of success. The High Riders had spent generations teaching slaves that pain and death were inevitable. Angron had merely taught them those things could be spent deliberately. The gatehouse defenders poured fire downward as Angron reached the doors. The gates were reinforced to resist vehicles. He placed both hands against the seam and pushed. Nothing moved. Las fire burned across his back. Bullets struck his arms and flank. Blood ran down his legs. Angron pushed harder. Muscles swelled across his shoulders until old scars whitened. Metal groaned. Locking bars bent within the gate. He roared, not at the defenders, not at the city, but at the nails and every hand that had ever closed a chain around another human throat. The hinges screamed. One gate twisted inward. The first kin guard through the breach fired point blank into Angron's chest. Angron seized him by the head and smashed him into the gate hard enough to rupture the skull inside the helmet. He struck again. The helmet flattened. A third impact burst blood from the gorget and visor seams. Angron threw the corpse into the formation behind it and entered the city. The rebels followed. Distance vanished. High Rider fire superiority died with it. Jochura's western group struck the defenders from behind as the main breach widened. Clester's fighters poured through industrial alleys. Laborers sabotaged relay housings and plunged whole defensive sectors into darkness. Kin Guard squads attempting orderly withdrawal discovered arena veterans inside doorways, beneath loading platforms, and coming through maintenance hatches. Gun barrels became too long. Formations broke around corners. Jochura cast his chain over a soldier's rifle, trapped the weapon against a wall, and hauled the man forward until Clester drove her spear through his breastplate joint. Asti killed an officer with a knife stolen from the officer's own belt, then held it up for Jochura to see. Good knife. Jochura smashed a gunstock into another man's teeth. Fight now, steal later. I can do both. The city burned by midday. Manufactoria caught fire when damaged power systems ruptured. Fuel stores detonated beneath bombardment from panicked defenders attempting to stop rebel advances through industrial quarters. Buildings collapsed into streets, already clogged with bodies. A residential tower came down after fire gutted its lower supports, its upper floors folding into one another, with a grinding roar that buried fighters from both sides beneath stone, glass, and burning furniture. Runoff channels overflowed with black industrial water and blood. Wounded men crawled into them seeking shelter and drowned because shattered limbs could not lift their faces above the current. Angron moved through all of it, like the incarnation of every punishment the High Riders had ever inflicted. A Kin Guard barricade held one broad avenue leading upward toward the ruling terraces. Automatic weapons covered the approaches. The rebels tried twice and left bodies scattered across the paving. Angron came forward on the third attempt. A grenade detonated close enough to drive fragments into his face. One entered beneath his eye. He tore it free and kept coming. A defender fired until his weapon clicked empty. Angron reached the barricade, caught the man by the cuirass, and hurled him through his own squad. Another soldier tried to draw a sidearm. Angron punched through the breastplate. The armor folded inward against ribs, and the ribs folded inward against lungs and heart. Blood erupted from the soldier's mouth. Angron dragged him close, tore the weapon from his hand, and used the corpse as a shield while the rebels crossed the final meters. When he threw the body aside, its chest remained caved into a hollow. They climbed, street by street, terrace by terrace. The governing precinct sealed itself behind polished walls, while the lower city died. Officials sent negotiators only when they understood the gates would not hold. The first delegation approached under a white cloth and spoke of lawful surrender, restoration of civil order, and protections available to those rebels willing to lay down weapons. Angron listened until the man used the word property. Then he broke his neck. The remaining negotiators recoiled. "You misunderstand," one stammered. "No," Angron said. "I understand you perfectly. We can discuss terms. You had terms, cages, brands, collars. The institutions of New Syria are older than any one household. You cannot simply destroy lawful order because abuses occurred within." Angron crossed the distance. The official's next words became a gargle as Angron's hand closed around his throat. "Abuses." He lifted the man from the ground. "You built arenas." The official clawed at his wrist. "You made children watch men die so they would learn what obedience looked like." The throat collapsed in Angron's grip. "You cut my father open with my hands." The corpse fell. No one offered another legal argument. The ruling precinct broke before nightfall. Some High Riders attempted escape through private tunnels and found liberated domestic slaves waiting for them. Others armed household guards and died behind furniture overturned into barricades. A few surrendered. Angron did not order universal slaughter, but neither did he protect masters from those they had owned. Old debts were paid in rooms decorated with paintings, polished stone and imported wood, while fires climbed the walls outside. The victory took less than the span of a Nucerian day and the night surrounding it. Later, Angron would remember the duration more sharply than many names. It would become a measure inside him, a blade he would one day press against warriors far mightier than these starving rebels. Mortal slaves with stolen guns and arena blades had consumed a city in little more than 30 hours. He would never forgive soldiers born for conquest when they failed to equal the dead. At dawn, the stronghold no longer belonged to the High Riders. Smoke covered the upper terraces. Corpses filled the avenues. The gates hung broken. Slave pens stood open. Food stores were being emptied into carts, while former laborers distributed ammunition beside dead Kinguard. Angron stood above the city with blood drying black across his skin. Below him, someone shouted a phrase. He did not hear it clearly at first. Then another voice repeated it. Eaters of cities. Laughter followed, not the laughter of Deshea's galleries. Another fighter shouted it louder. The Eaters of Cities. The name traveled through the ruins. Men took it up because they had watched the impossible happen and needed words for what they had become. They had not conquered territory like a High Rider army. They had entered the city hungry and left its masters dead, its prisons empty, its armories gutted, and its walls burning behind them. Angron looked at Clesta. She shrugged. I have heard worse. Asti wiped a stolen knife clean. I like it. Of course you do, Jokura said. Larbadan leaned upon a captured rifle because his wounded leg had finally decided it hated him. Do we eat another one tomorrow? Angron looked toward the horizon. In distant capitals, the reports had already arrived. High Rider families that had dismissed Deshea as embarrassment now read casualty totals from a destroyed stronghold. Orders passed between estates that had spent generations feuding with one another. Garrisons were mobilized, armories opened, rival houses shared troop movements and intelligence because hatred of one another had become less important than fear of him. Beyond the smoking city, military columns were already forming upon the roads. Then more again. Angron watched them gathering in the distance, while behind him the name spread through the liberated streets. The Eaters of Cities had been born. Nuceria was coming to kill them. The High Riders stopped making the same mistakes. That was the first thing Angron respected about them, and the first thing he hated. Defeat had burned arrogance out of some commanders and replaced it with calculation. The armies hunting the Eaters of Cities no longer pursued blindly into manufacturum districts or followed fugitives through drainage networks, where pit fighters waited behind blind corners with chains and stolen blades. They began shaping the land around the rebellion instead. Bridges were destroyed before Angron could use them. Food stores were emptied or burned along expected routes. Villages suspected of aiding the escaped slaves were stripped of grain and livestock, then left beneath guard so hunger itself became another High Rider weapon. Patrols withdrew from narrow roads and concentrated upon open ground where rifles, laser weapons, and automatic guns could kill at distances the Eaters could not answer. Angron watched the pattern emerge over weeks of marching, killing, and starvation. His brothers and sisters believed the enemy feared them, and they were right. But fear had finally made the masters intelligent. Nuceria was becoming an arena built at continental scale. The High Riders were closing gates, narrowing routes, withholding food, and forcing their quarry toward ground, prepared for slaughter. Falka waited at the end of that design, a broad basin of broken farmland, bordered by low ridges and drainage cuts, with too little cover to conceal an army, and too much open earth between the rebels and any retreat worth taking. Jochura studied it from the ridge and spat into the dust. They want us down there. Angron looked across the basin, where distant military pennants moved behind ranks of armor. Yes, Clesta leaned on her shriek spear. Then we go somewhere else. Angron smiled without humor. No, we make them regret choosing the place. The Eaters of Cities had no engineers in the manner of formal armies, but they had men who had repaired harvest machines under armed supervision, quarry slaves who understood load and fracture, arena veterans who knew how shields overlapped, and laborers who had spent their lives making useful things for people who despised them. Falkar became a fortress, constructed from whatever could be carried. Arena shields scavenged from old fighting pits formed the center. Captured kin guard protection filled the stronger ranks. Door plates torn from abandoned farm machinery became slabs behind which two men could crouch. Sheet metal was hammered flat and strapped to wooden frames. Even sections of livestock fencing were wrapped in hide and used where nothing better remained. Angron walked along the line while fighters tested grips and adjusted spacing. No officer called cadence, no standards marked units. Men and women stood beside whoever had survived long enough to become trusted. Some still wore pieces of slave iron around wrists or throats. Others had replaced rags with scavenged coats, armor plates tied on with wire, or the bloody equipment of dead kin guard. To a high rider observer, the formation must have looked like refuse arranged in rows. Angron saw something else. He saw people who had learned formation, not from drill yards, but from arenas where stepping too far from the man beside you meant being opened from groin to chest. "Shield over the edge of the one to your left," Clesta shouted. "Not above it. You leave that gap, and a spear finds the ribs." Yochura moved down the second rank, kicking ankles into better position. "If the man in front falls, you step into him. Do not climb around him. Do not stop to mourn. Close the hole first. Cry later." Asti looked at the wall and muttered, "I preferred cities." Larbadan adjusted the straps around his damaged arm. Cities had roofs. Exactly. Civilized places. Across Falkar, the High Rider commanders had the better plan. Angron knew it, because he would have done the same in their place. Hold the ridges. Keep the kin guard at range. Let automatic weapons chew the shield wall into scraps. Force the slaves to cross the basin, while every step cost bodies. If the Eaters tried to retreat, mounted troops would harry them, until hunger completed what gunfire began. It was simple, ugly, and effective. The trouble came from the nobles observing from the rear. Their viewing platforms had been erected far behind the front line beneath colored awnings, as though Falkar were another arena, and war only mattered when witnessed from comfort. Messengers rode constantly between those platforms and the commanders. Orders changed. Units shifted without tactical reason. Angron watched through a stolen magnifier, while one infantry formation moved forward, halted, then moved forward again. Yochura saw the same thing. Their masters are impatient. Angron lowered the lens. "Good." Clesta frowned. "They could kill us from there." "They know." "Then why move?" Angron looked toward the distant awnings. "Because killing us is not enough. They need to see us break." The nails stirred with warm approval. "So we show them something else." The first gunfire came before the sun reached its height. Long flashes crossed the basin, and the front rank began dying. A laser struck an improvised shield, punched through metal, and entered the fighter behind it at the collarbone. His upper chest opened in a burst of scorched flesh, and the beam continued into the man behind him. Both fell. "Close!" Angron roared. The second rank stepped into the bodies before they stopped moving. Automatic fire followed, sweeping along the line in hammering bursts. Shields jumped beneath impacts. Wood exploded into splinters. A woman 3 places from Clesta lost her hand when a projectile tore through the shield rim and wrist together. She stared once at the stump spraying blood, tucked the ruined arm against her body, and shifted her shield grip to the other hand. The line continued forward. Grenades came next, thrown short at first, and then corrected. One landed behind the wall. A fighter tried to kick it forward, but struck too late. The detonation tore his leg off at the hip and opened the bellies of 2 people beside him. Intestines spilled across the trampled soil in slick ropes. One wounded man fell onto them, clawed for purchase, and accidentally dragged part of another man's bowel around his forearm. He screamed until someone behind him stepped over his chest, and the formation swallowed him. "Close!" Angron bellowed again. Every gap shut. Every corpse became ground. They advanced because stopping meant dying without touching the enemy. The shield wall moved across Falka under fire that would have broken disciplined troops taught to preserve themselves. The Eaters had learned a different mathematics. Death was expected. Pain was expected. If one fighter died and the next stepped into the space, the wall remained alive. Kinguard weapons tore open heads, shoulders and abdomens, but the formation crawled onward like an injured beast, too angry to understand it had been mortally wounded. Larbadan stood near the left where the shields were weakest. A round struck his thigh and exited in a fistful of muscle. His leg buckled. The man behind him reached forward. "Larbadan, do not. You are hit." I noticed. He locked his knee, shifted his weight and continued. Asti, crouched several ranks back, shouted, "You are leaking!" Larbadan snarled, "Then stop looking." Jochura laughed despite the gunfire. The sound spread strangely through the line. Others joined him. High Rider rounds kept killing them, and the slaves laughed as they walked into it. The nails were screaming by the time Angron saw the enemy infantry begin to move. The High Rider commanders had been overruled. Their formations descended from the ridge in disciplined ranks, shields forward, rifles and spears carried with the confidence of soldiers ordered to finish work artillery had already accomplished. Behind them, officers shouted cadence, while the ruling families watched from safety. The command was obvious. Charge the slaves, break them in sight of their masters, turn Falka into a spectacle of restored order. Angron tasted blood where he had bitten through the inside of his cheek. "Ready!" he roared. Rifles vanished behind the High Rider shields. Spears lowered. The Eaters tightened their line. Clester raised the shriek spear over the front rank, its mechanism twitching as though eager. Jochura wrapped his chain around one forearm. Asti disappeared lower behind the shields. Larbadan leaned forward upon the leg that should not have supported him. Angron stood in the center with no shield. He did not need one now. He needed room. The 2 formations met with a sound greater than screaming. Shields struck shields and turned hundreds of separate impacts into one enormous thunderclap rolling across Falka. Men vanished between the lines. Spears punched through boards, flesh and armor. One High Rider weapon entered a rebel's mouth and burst through the back of his head, carrying teeth and grey tissue across the shield behind him. Another spear struck a captured plate and stopped, only for the slave holding it to seize the shaft and drag the soldier forward until Jochura's chain wrapped around his throat. Automatic rifles became useless where bodies pressed chest to chest. Soldiers tried to raise muzzles and found no space. Some fired anyway. Rounds passed through one body into another, killing friend and enemy together. A High Rider fell between formations and disappeared beneath boots. His breastplate held against blades, but not the weight of dozens trampling over him. Angron heard ribs collapse beneath metal. Another man went down face first into the mud and could not rise because 3 corpses fell atop him. He suffocated beneath their weight while fighting continued inches above his skull. Angron entered the collision point. He did not fight as part of the wall. He destroyed the idea that a wall existed. The first High Rider shield shattered beneath his fist. His knuckles drove through metal, through the man's forearm behind it, and into the face beyond. Bone collapsed inward. The soldier fell without a recognizable nose or jaw. Angron seized the next shield by its rim and tore it sideways, dislocating both of its bearer's shoulders before dragging the man into the rebel line. Blades entered the exposed body from 3 directions. Angron stepped into the space he had created. A spear struck his abdomen and went deep. He caught the shaft, pulled himself farther onto it until he reached the wielder, then crushed the man's skull between both hands. Blood burst through his fingers. Another soldier attacked. Angron struck him in the chest. Armor folded inward around the fist, compressing ribs until the broken ends pierced lungs and heart. The man vomited blood across Angron's arm and died standing for a heartbeat before dropping. The gap widened. "Through!" Angron roared. "Through them!" Clester came first. Her shriek spear screamed as she drove it beneath a Kinguard visor. The blade entered through the mouth and tore out beneath the base of the skull, the mechanism's metallic howl merging with the man's choking death noise. She ripped it free and spun, using reach to keep 3 soldiers from reforming their line. Jochura cast his chain over a shield, caught the defender beneath the arm, and pulled him sideways. The man vanished into the rebel ranks. Hands seized him. A knife entered behind the knee. Another opened his throat. Jochura never looked to see him die. He was already hunting the next weakness. Asti disappeared into the press entirely. Long weapons became liabilities there. His short blades became perfect. He slid beneath arms, stabbed groins through gaps in armor, opened hamstrings, and drove steel behind ears. At one point, Angron saw Asti climb onto a high rider's back, hook 2 fingers through the man's nostrils, and pull the head backward far enough to expose the throat. The knife crossed once. Blood sprayed in a fan. Asti dropped before the corpse did. The left flank nearly failed. A high rider reserve struck where casualties had thinned the Eaters to 2 ranks. Larbaden was there. His wounded leg folded beneath him as the impact came. He fell to one knee, caught the shield of the dead man beside him, and raised it anyway. A spear entered his upper arm. He trapped the shaft between body and shield and held it there while the fighters behind him stabbed around his shoulders. Another soldier struck his face with a shield rim and opened his cheek to the teeth. Larbaden spat blood into the man's eyes and drove the broken edge of his own shield beneath the soldier's chin. Still standing? Asti screamed somewhere nearby. Larbaden was kneeling in blood with a spear through his arm and half his face hanging open. Near enough. The high rider line fractured. It happened first as hesitation. Men looked sideways and found units that should have been there no longer existed. Officers shouted commands that could not travel through the crush. Then one section stepped backward. Another followed. Discipline became retreat. Retreat became flight. And Falka ceased being a battle. The Eaters pursued. Mud swallowed boots. Blood made the ground slick enough that men fell and were killed where they landed. High rider soldiers threw away shields to run faster. Some dropped rifles. Others begged. Angron passed the ordinary fugitives when faster prey appeared beyond them. Officers were riding for the rear. Men who had ordered infantry into the shield wall now believed distance entitled them to survive. Angron sprinted through the broken field. A mounted officer looked back once, saw him coming, and drove heels into the animal beneath him. Angron caught the rear of the saddle, ripped both rider and mount sideways, and hurled them into the mud. The officer crawled free with one leg broken. "Wait," he gasped. Angron stood over him. "Your men asked for that." The officer stared. "What?" "Time." Angron seized him by the throat. "You gave them none." He smashed the man head first into the ground. Once, twice. The third impact split the skull open and left part of the face embedded in the mud. Jochura and Clester reached the command wagons. Rebels dragged officers from beneath tables where they had hidden during the collapse. One noble screamed that he had not ordered the charge. Another insisted his family had opposed the arenas. A third offered food, weapons, and formal recognition if the Eaters withdrew. Angron listened from several paces away, while the nails urged him to slaughter every breathing thing within reach. "No bargains?" Jochura asked. Angron looked toward the battlefield. Bodies covered Falka so densely that in places no earth remained visible. Not with men who bargain only after losing. The ruling observers fled before the rebels reached their platforms. Their awnings burned behind them. By sunset, Falka belonged to the Eaters of Cities. No one celebrated immediately. Victory had cost too much. They moved among the dead, calling names. Some answers came weakly from beneath bodies. Most did not. Shields were lifted from men crushed under the wall. Wounded fighters were carried to dry ground. Clesta found part of her shriek spear mechanism broken and sat repairing it beside a row of corpses. Jokura cleaned his chain in muddy water that turned pink around his hands. Asti had stopped making jokes. Larbaden finally allowed someone to bind his leg because he could no longer pretend the limb worked properly. Angron stood alone where the formations had collided. The nails were quiet for the moment. That made the silence worse. They had won. Nuceria still had more soldiers, more cities, more guns, more food. Falka had proven the Eaters could fight as an army. It had also proven how many brothers and sisters an army could consume. Scouts arrived after darkness. 3 came first, then another from the northern road. Their reports did not match because the enemy was no longer one enemy. Several High Rider forces were moving at once. Different houses, different armies, different banners, all toward them. Jokura listened and slowly looked at Angron. They are cooperating. Angron stared into the darkness beyond Falka. For generations, the High Riders had hated one another, almost as much as they hated their slaves. Now they had found something they feared more. Him. The Eaters of Cities had won Falka. For the first time, Angron understood they were losing the war. The war stopped belonging to cities. After Falka, the Eaters of Cities ceased trying to hold what they conquered because possession was another chain, and chains were things Angron had learned to break. A captured district required guards. A liberated manufactorum required food, ammunition, and men to defend it. A conquered stronghold became a fixed point. Upon every High Rider map, something armies could surround, bombard, and starve until victory became burial beneath masonry. Angron understood it before most of his brothers and sisters did. They were not conquerors. They had no government to install, no supply fleets, no reserves moving behind them beneath banners and marching songs. They were fugitives who had learned to attack faster than their hunters could gather. So they became motion. They struck a grain depot before dawn and vanished before noon. They tore open slave compounds, killed the overseers, seized whatever weapons the guards carried, and left the walls burning behind them. They ambushed isolated patrols in ravines and maintenance roads, dragging bodies into drainage trenches before larger forces could arrive. They destroyed bridges after crossing them. They poisoned fuel stores they could not carry. They broke tracking beacons from captured vehicles and sent the empty machines running down roads toward false destinations. The High Riders called it banditry because acknowledging military defeat at the hands of slaves offended them. Angron called it surviving. The seasons passed through wounds. Summer dust became rain, rain became cold, and every change in weather altered the shape of the army. Men who had escaped Dashir barefoot wore boots taken from corpses, then wore those boots until the soles separated and had to be bound with wire. Captured armor plates accumulated dents and burns until they were discarded for being heavier than the protection they offered. Rifles became clubs when magazines emptied. Charge weapons became expensive ornaments after the last compatible power cell died. Names vanished from the nightly count. At first, the Eaters had tried speaking all of them. Jokura would stand beside the fire and call each brother and sister who had failed to return, and someone would answer with where they had fallen. Then the list grew longer. Sometimes no one knew. Sometimes half a raiding group vanished beneath artillery or disappeared behind a burning ridge while delaying pursuit. Eventually, Jokura stopped reading names aloud because dawn arrived before grief ended. Angron remembered them anyway. That was his punishment. The nails carved pain through every memory, but did not erase them. Faces remained. Voices remained. Men he had watched die in autumn still argued inside his skull during winter. The High Riders changed with them. Convoys no longer traveled with token guards. Food moved behind armor. Ammunition wagons carried escorts large enough to fight minor battles. Settlements near rebel routes were searched without warning, and anyone suspected of aiding fugitives was hanged, shot, or left nailed to the entrances of labor compounds as instruction to the living. One village gave the eaters water and woke 3 days later to kin guard surrounding every road. Angron arrived too late. He found bodies hanging from irrigation towers, some with signs fastened to their chests, naming crimes such as sedition, theft of property, and collaboration with escaped stock. The word stock remained longest in his mind. He tore the signs down and crushed them beneath his boots. The nails demanded he attack the garrison immediately. Jochura stood beside him among the corpses. They want that. Angron stared at the distant defensive positions. I know. Then do not give it to them. They killed these people because of us. They killed them because killing is how masters explain ownership. Angron looked at him. Jochura did not lower his gaze. Choose the ground, brother. It took Angron a long time to step away. That became harder each month. The nails no longer waited for stillness. Exhaustion made them hungry. Hunger made them cruel. Every injury sent new impulses through machinery embedded in flesh, already inflamed around the implant ports. Angron sometimes woke with blood beneath his fingernails and no memory of how it had arrived there. He would remember the beginning of a fight and the end, but not what lived between. The missing seconds became missing minutes. Once, after a skirmish with mounted kin guard, he found himself kneeling over a corpse whose chest he had torn open with his hands. The dead man had no head. Angron did not remember removing it. He looked around and saw his brothers watching from several paces away. Clesta held her shriek spear across her body, not threatening him, ready for him. That distinction hurt more than the nails. Angron, she said. He looked down at his hands. I know my name. Then answer it. He breathed. The machinery behind his eyes screamed for him to strike her. Instead, he forced his fingers open. I am here. Clesta lowered the spear. No one congratulated him. The shortages became another enemy. High Rider weapons had once seemed inexhaustible because the slaves saw them only in armories and guard hands. War taught them otherwise. Automatic rifles drank ammunition. Lass weapons required functioning charge packs. Grenades could not be sharpened after use. Captured guns gave enormous advantage for a few battles and then became dead weight carried out of habit. Asti collected ammunition the way he collected knives, forever certain one more hidden magazine would save someone later. He sat beside fires counting cartridges by touch. Jochura repaired chain links with scavenged pins and bits of wire. Clesta maintained the screaming mechanism of her spear long after replacement components became impossible to find. Stripping it down with reverence she would have mocked in anyone else. Labadon's equipment grew simpler because his body demanded it. He abandoned a captured rifle after nerve damage made his grip unreliable and returned to a one-handed chopping blade. His arm was dying. Everyone knew. Labadon refused to discuss it. The wound had begun weeks earlier as a cut across the forearm. Dirt entered it, then fever. The flesh around the injury darkened despite boiling water and every stolen medicine the rebels possessed. Angron smelled the rot before Labadon admitted anything. They sat beneath the remains of an agricultural shelter while rain hammered the roof. Asti cleaned 3 knives with a strip of cloth and pretended not to listen. Jochura repaired chain. Clesta worked a whetstone along her spearhead. Labadon held the infected arm away from the fire. You need it cut, Angron said. Labadon stared into the rain. No. It is rotting. It has always been ugly. You will die. That happens. Angron's jaw tightened. Labadon finally looked at him. Do not make that face. What face? The one where you decide being stronger than death means you can order it away. I can hold you while they cut. That's supposed to comfort me? Asti looked up. I could do it. Everyone turned toward him. Asti raised both hands. I have knives. Clester said, You have butchered enough meat. I am precise. You once stabbed yourself hiding a blade in your boot. Once. 3 times, Jotura muttered. Labadan laughed until coughing took him. Angron listened to the sound and felt the nails bite because affection was still something they punished. He endured it. Later that night, while Labadan drank enough stolen spirit to lose consciousness, a former arena chirurgeon took the arm above the spread of corruption. Labadan woke before the cutting ended. He did not scream. He bit through a leather strap and called Asti a thief for stealing the cup he had been promised afterward. Asti returned the cup. It was empty. The eaters continued moving. At one fortified food depot, Angron made himself the attack. The place sat behind open ground surrounded by low walls and 2 firing towers. A conventional assault would have fed bodies into guns. The rebels lacked enough ammunition to suppress both positions. Angron studied the walls, listened to a former transport slave describe the loading gate, and decided the only useful weapon they still possessed in abundance was him. Jotura understood the plan and hated it. You walk into their guns. Yes. They shoot you. Yes. Excellent strategy. While they shoot me, you take the south wall. And when they kill you? Angron looked at him. Jotura spat. I know. Stupid question. Angron walked alone across the field. The first rifle struck him at a distance the arena had never taught him to respect. A projectile entered his flank and spun him half around. He straightened. The second shot hit his thigh. The third burned a line across his shoulder. Then both towers opened fire. The world became impact and heat. Las fire burned pits through his flesh. Automatic rounds punched into muscle, broke against bone, or passed through him trailing blood. Angron roared and kept walking. The nails flooded his mind, with such savage pleasure that for several breaths he forgot why he was there. He saw only walls and men who needed to die. Angron! The shout came from somewhere behind him. He remembered. He ran. The defenders concentrated everything upon the giant, charging directly toward them. That was what fear did. Men aimed at what frightened them most, not what endangered them most. Yokura's fighters reached the southern wall under almost no fire. Clester's group entered through a drainage culvert. Asti somehow appeared inside the gatehouse before anyone understood he had separated from the others. Angron reached the loading gate. The kin guard there fired until weapons overheated. He tore the gate open anyway. The first soldier died when Angron grabbed him by the waist and threw him into the wall. His spine broke on impact. The second thrust a rifle forward like a spear. Angron caught it, dragged him close, and drove his forehead into the visor. Bone and faceplate collapsed together. The third tried to retreat up a ladder. Angron seized his ankle and pulled. The man struck each rung on the way down, then landed neck first across the loading platform. His head remained at an angle no living man could imitate. The depot fell before dusk. They took food, medicine, and ammunition. Angron spent the night bleeding into the earth, while the people he had protected divided the supplies. The wounds healed, not quickly enough to prevent pain, too quickly to let him pretend he was mortal. The strategy worked again, then again. He began placing himself wherever enemy fire was strongest, because every weapon pointed at him was a weapon not pointed at Jokura, Clester, Asti, Labadan, or the nameless fighter carrying food for someone unable to walk. It was effective. It was also changing him. Each charge brought relief. Each impact fed the nails. The line between sacrifice and hunger began to blur. Sometimes Angron told himself he was drawing fire for his family. Sometimes he knew he simply wanted to feel the world striking him so he could strike back harder. The High Riders gave him language for what he was becoming. Beast, animal, degenerate, arena vermin. They broadcast the words across towns before rebel attacks, warning populations that Angron's followers would butcher everyone they found. One captured proclamation described the Eaters of Cities as a contagion threatening lawful Nucerian civilization. Angron read the document beside a pile of dead slaves discovered beneath an estate house. The dead had been chained together. Some were children. He read the word civilization again. Then he laughed. Clester heard him. What? Angron held up the proclamation. They think armor makes them righteous. No one answered. They think walls make them civilized. Titles make them better. Laws make the chains lawful, so the chains become good. Jochura looked at the bodies. Angron tore the paper in half. A master in silk is still a master. A murderer behind a law is still a murderer. Asti slid a knife from the body of an overseer. And a thief? Angron looked at him. Still annoying. Asti smiled. For a moment they sounded like the people who had escaped Ashea. That moment passed. Another city burned at the end of the next season. They entered through industrial tunnels and killed the gate crews from behind. Angron broke the central security compound, while Jochura's fighters freed labor barracks. Clester took an arena district and opened cages before the masters could execute the prisoners inside. Asti emerged from an administrative building carrying 3 knives, a pouch of ammunition, and a silver drinking cup he insisted had tactical value. Labadan fought with one arm and killed a kin guard officer by trapping the man's sword against his empty sleeve before driving an axe into his throat. The city fell. The slaves came out. The rulers fled or died. Flames climbed towers. Once, the Eaters of Cities would have roared their name until the streets answered. This time, the cheering lasted only minutes. Too many familiar faces were absent. Angron walked through the captured square and counted without meaning to. The formation around him was smaller. He remembered where each gap had come from. Falkar, the Eastern Bridge, the grain ambush, the depot, the orchard where artillery found them, the river crossing where 30 brothers vanished. Beneath machine gun fire, they liberated people faster than some died, but many of the freed could not fight. Others escaped to distant villages rather than join the war. The core of the Eaters shrank after every victory. Angron finally understood the mathematics. Nuceria had more bodies than he had brothers, more ammunition than he had blood, more seasons than his rebellion could survive. He hated the truth. It remained true. The first snow came while the city still burned. A few white flakes drifted through ash and vanished on hot stone. Angron watched them melt against blood on his hands. Scouts arrived before dawn. One had lost an eye. Another carried a wound through the abdomen and died shortly after delivering his report. Armies were moving from the east, more from the south. Another force from the western estates. High-rider houses that had once killed one another over borders and trade routes now shared roads, intelligence and ammunition. Jochura stood beside Angron in the falling snow. They mean to surround us. Yes. Where? Angron looked north. Beyond the ruined city, the land rose. Farther still, black against the winter horizon, mountains waited beneath gathering cloud. The Deshalika. The nails throbbed softly. Angron looked at the surviving Eaters of Cities, his brothers, his sisters, his army, his family. Take what food you can carry, he said. Burn the rest. Clester understood first. The mountains. Angron nodded. Asti looked toward the distant peaks. I hate mountains. Labadan adjusted the empty sleeve pinned across his chest. You hate everything. Not knives. Jochura wound his chain around one arm. Behind them, another liberated city burned. Ahead, winter swallowed the road. Angron turned toward the mountains. Move! The Eaters of Cities stopped marching toward victories. They marched away from extermination. The distinction changed everything. Once, Angron had chosen when to strike, where to enter a city, which gate to break, and which road to burn behind them. Now the High Riders chose the direction of the war by closing every direction except one. Patrols pressed from the south. Armored columns moved along the western roads. Kin Guard detachments occupied wells and bridge crossings to the east. Reconnaissance engines ranged ahead of the main pursuit, watching valleys and sending warning whenever the fugitives turned from the route their enemies had prepared for them. The only open road climbed north toward the Deshalika Mountains, and everyone understood why it had been left open. The High Riders no longer wanted to defeat Angron in battle. They wanted to herd him. They wanted the rebels exhausted, starving and compressed against stone, where there would be nowhere left to retreat. Jochura said as much, while they watched another convoy moving through the valley below. They have learned to hunt. Angron lay flat against the frozen ridge, blood dried black around a wound in his side where a rifle round had passed through him 2 days earlier. They learned because we killed the stupid ones. Asti crouched nearby, wrapping rags around boots, whose soles had nearly separated. Then perhaps we should have spared a few. Labadan shifted beside him, one sleeve pinned empty against his chest, his surviving hand gripping an axe with a cracked haft. You would have complained about them. I complain about everyone. That is because everyone has met you. Angron almost smiled. Then a distant machine gun opened fire, and the ridge began spitting stone. They went down the opposite slope under tracer flashes and hard white streaks of las fire. The High Riders fired at movement now, not confirmed targets, filling likely escape routes with enough death that accuracy became unnecessary. A beam struck the rock beside Angron and turned frost to steam. Automatic fire followed a heartbeat later, rounds ricocheting through the gully with vicious metallic snaps. A brother behind him screamed. Angron looked back and saw the man sitting upright against the slope, with both hands pressed to his abdomen. Blood pushed between his fingers in rhythmic surges. Something pale and tubular bulged beneath one palm. "Move!" Jochura shouted. The wounded man tried. His legs did not answer. Another burst stitched across the stones. One round entered beneath his eye and exploded the back of his skull against the ridge. Grey matter and fragments of bone painted the rocks. No one stopped. There was nothing left to save. That was the cruelty of pursuit. Battle sometimes allowed a wounded man to crawl behind a wall, a surgeon to cut away ruined flesh, a brother to kneel beside him while he died. The hunt allowed none of those luxuries. Every pause became an aiming point. Night did not end the fire. It made the weapons brighter. Lasers cut through darkness as momentary lines of white and red, leaving burning afterimages across exhausted eyes. Machine guns hammered from unseen slopes, their reports echoing between ridges until the rebels could no longer tell which direction held the shooters. Grenades came over rocks without warning. A fist-sized shape would bounce once in the dark, and whoever saw it had less than a heartbeat to choose whether to run, kick it away, or throw himself upon it so others might live. One brother chose the last. Angron remembered his name, but not the words he shouted. The detonation lifted the man from the ground and opened his back in a fan of shattered ribs. The fragments meant for everyone else remained buried inside him. He died without legs below the knees and with enough metal in his chest to fill a handful. The formation moved on before the smoke cleared. The High Riders understood that fugitives required sleep. They attacked that instead. Patrols approached camps just close enough to fire, then withdrew before Angron could close the distance. Hours later, another unit came from another direction. No engagement lasted long enough to annihilate the attackers, but each stole rest. Men began falling asleep while walking. One brother stepped over the edge of a ravine because exhaustion had made the darkness look flat. His body struck stone several times on the way down. No one climbed after him. Another sat against a tree during a 5-minute halt and never stood again. His heart had simply ceased while he slept. Food became smaller every morning. Asti stopped joking about it first. That frightened Angron more than hunger. They ate grain stolen weeks earlier, ground between stones and mixed with melted snow. They ate strips of dried meat so old that mold had to be scraped away with knives. Men boiled leather when nothing else remained. Ammunition disappeared faster. Every shot became a decision. Joshua prohibited firing at targets beyond easy range because no one knew when the next magazine would be captured. Energy weapons were worse. Charge packs failed in the cold or emptied without replacement. The rebels carried rifles for days after they became useless because abandoning a weapon felt too much like surrender. Eventually, those rifles became clubs. Boots failed, bandages failed, medicine vanished. The Eaters had once been able to keep a man alive through wounds that would horrify civilians. Arena veterans knew how to bind arteries, splint broken limbs, and cauterize flesh with heated steel. None of that mattered when infection reached the blood. Men developed fevers and continued marching until they fell delirious. Frost entered wounds. Gangrene turned toes black. A brother named Varus woke one morning unable to feel either foot. They removed 3 toes before midday. He walked until night and died while attempting to urinate beside the road. Angron watched all of it. The nails watched through him. Every death created anger. Anger created relief. The implants were teaching his grief to travel one road only. He began volunteering for every rearguard. Joshua refused him. The first argument happened beside a narrow pass where perhaps 40 Eaters could hold several hundred kinguard for an hour if they were willing to die there. Angron looked at the terrain and said, "I stay." "No," Joshua answered. Angron turned slowly. Joshua did not retreat. "If you stay, everyone stays. I can hold them longer. That is the problem." Angron's jaw tightened. "Explain." "You kill enough of them, and the nails will not let you leave." The words landed harder than an insult. Joshua continued, "Then we come back for you, because that is what we do. Then this entire army dies in one pass, because you wanted to save it. I did not ask you to come back. You never have." Angron stepped closer until Joshua had to look upward. "I am stronger than every man you plan to leave here." "Yes." "I can survive wounds that kill them." "Yes." "Then why waste their lives?" Joshua's expression changed. Not fear, anger. "Because they are theirs." Angron said nothing. "Their lives, their deaths, their choice. You taught us that." The nails pulsed. Angron hated the logic because it belonged to him. Behind Joshua, 6 fighters had already volunteered for the rearguard. None looked away when Angron turned toward them. One smiled. "We will make noise." Angron's hands curled into fists. "Hold until the second horn," he said. The fighter nodded. Angron left them. The gunfire began before the main column reached the next ridge. It continued for almost an hour. Then it stopped. No one asked what had happened. They all knew. Rear guards became part of every day. Sometimes 3 men delayed 50, sometimes 10 delayed hundreds. Narrow bridges, switchbacks, and ruined agricultural compounds became places where brothers said goodbye without ceremonies, because ceremony wasted time. The Eaters learned not to look backward after a rearguard began firing. Those who did often slowed. Those who slowed often joined the dead. Angron hated every step that carried him farther from them. He tried to repay those deaths by raiding the pursuers. The first raid worked. Scouts found a kinguard supply detachment resting beneath a ridgeline after assuming the rebels were too exhausted to counterattack. Angron took Joshua, Asti, Clester, and a few dozen fighters down through a frozen drainage cut. They struck before dawn. The sentries died silently. Joshua caught one beneath the chin with his chain and dragged him backward until cartilage collapsed. Asti opened another throat while covering the man's mouth. Clester put her shriek spear through a third so quickly that the weapon's mechanical cry did not sound until the blade had already entered the neck. Then Angron reached the camp. Silence ended. He overturned the first transport with both hands. Soldiers tumbled from beneath canvas covers. One fired from his back. The round entered Angron's shoulder and lodged against bone. Angron stepped on the man's chest. The breastplate buckled. He pressed harder. Ribs collapsed beneath the armor and punctured the lungs. Blood foamed from the soldier's mouth. Angron lifted his foot and stamped again. The chest became a flattened hollow. The nails sang. Another kin-guard charged with a bayonet. Angron caught the rifle, snapped it in half, and drove the broken barrel through the man's face. Steel entered beside the nose, shattered the upper jaw, and emerged behind the skull trailing grey tissue. Around him, the eaters seized food, ammunition, and medical packs. "Enough!" Clester shouted. Angron did not hear her. A soldier ran. Angron caught him. He seized the man by the belt and threw him against a transport wheel. The spine broke across the rim. "Angron!" He turned toward another target. Jochura stepped into his path. "We have what we came for." The nails screamed at Angron to remove him. "Move! No! Move! Look at me!" Angron struck him, not with full strength. Enough. Jochura hit the ground and rolled. Silence fell across the nearest fighters. Angron stared at him. For several heartbeats, he did not know why his brother was bleeding from the mouth. Then memory returned. He looked at his own fist. Jochura spat red into the snow. "There you are." Angron's stomach twisted. "Get up. You first." "I am standing." "Then start thinking." The nails punished him for stopping. Angron breathed through the pain. Around them, High Rider reinforcements would already be moving toward the gunfire. He forced his hands open. "Take everything," he said. They withdrew. Angron looked back at the supply camp 3 times. Each time the nails demanded he return and finish the killing. He did not. The next raid was worse. Then the next. Every engagement made disengagement harder. Angron began losing time between the first kill and Jochura dragging him away. Once, he pursued a fleeing kin-guard patrol nearly a league beyond the supply carts they had attacked. When he returned, his brothers had already buried 2 of their own. Clester stared at him. "Worth it?" Angron said nothing. "That man you chased, was he worth 2? He would have brought others. There are always others." The nails flared. Angron nearly answered with violence. Instead, he walked away. Larbaden deteriorated quietly. The missing arm had saved him from the infection that once threatened his life, but the stump never healed properly. Cold split the scar tissue. His remaining hand shook from exhaustion. He had grown so thin that his cheeks hollowed beneath the skin, yet he marched near the front because pity offended him. One evening, Angron found him trying to tighten his boot with his teeth and one hand. Angron knelt. Larbaden glared. "No." Angron reached for the strap. "I said no. You cannot tie it." "I can. You have been fighting it for 10 minutes. Then I am winning." Angron pulled the strap tight and fastened it. Larbaden looked furious. Angron sat beside him. After a while, Larbaden said, "I could have done it. I know. You did not need to. I know. That makes it worse." Angron almost laughed. The nails bit down upon the emotion. He winced. Larbaden saw. "Still bad?" "Worse." "Good." Angron looked at him. Larbaden shrugged one shoulder. "Would hate to think I suffered alone." This time Angron did laugh. Pain stabbed through his skull. He laughed anyway. Later, much later, when Angron commanded warriors encased in ceramite and watched transhuman sons complain about wounds that mortal men would have counted blessings, he would remember Larbaden. One arm, rot in the scars, boots held together with wire, starving, freezing, still moving. That became courage in Angron's mind. Not banners, not honors, not gene-forged strength. A dying man refusing to stop because stopping meant chains. The mountains rose around them gradually, then all at once. The Deshalika swallowed the horizon. Roads narrowed into passes. Vehicles struggled on ice and steep stone. High Rider armor lost some of its advantage. Long fields of fire disappeared between cliffs. The terrain that trapped the rebels also protected them. Jotura saw the contradiction. They cannot surround us as easily here. They do not need to, Angron said. Asti looked up at the cliffs. Because there is nowhere else to go. Yes. The High Riders had finally built the perfect arena. Mountain on one side, mountain on the other, armies behind, winter ahead. Angron felt almost peaceful. The nails punished him immediately. He welcomed the pain. At dusk, they gathered in a hollow beneath the ridges. The surviving eaters looked smaller than Angron remembered. Not merely fewer, reduced. Men wrapped themselves in torn cloaks and blankets, stiff with frozen blood. Weapons rested across knees. Some had no ammunition, others had only blades. Labadan sat among them with his axe across his lap. Jokura coiled his chain. Asti inspected the edge of a knife. Clesta leaned against the rock with her spear beside her. They looked at Angron. He did not lie. There is no army waiting beyond these mountains. No one moved. There is no road to another land where the High Riders cannot follow. The wind hissed over stone. No ship is coming. The words meant little to men who had never possessed ships, but Angron spoke them because hope built upon lies disgusted him. We are running out of food. Someone laughed quietly. We are running out of ammunition. Asti raised a knife. Not this. A few men smiled. Angron looked across them. They may kill us. Silence. They probably will. Jotura nodded. Angron continued. But they will not take us back. Faces hardened. No cage. He looked toward the valley below. No arena. The nails throbbed. No collar. Angron's voice lowered. If they want us, they climb these mountains and take what remains from our corpses. That was all. No glorious promise. No miracle. Only ownership of the ending. Scouts returned after nightfall. They came down from the high ridges, exhausted and half-frozen. One had blood on his face from a split scalp. Another had lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Their report moved through the hollow in fragments. Forces approaching from the west, more from the southern road, Kinguard columns from the east, household armies joining them, reservists, mounted troops, armor stalled lower on the roads but still moving, different High Rider banners marching beneath shared orders. Jotura listened until the last scout finished. How many? The scout answered. No one spoke afterward. Angron looked at the surviving eaters of cities, starving, wounded, free. Then he began to laugh. It was not madness, not yet. It was vindication. For years the High Riders had called them animals, vermin, escaped property, and arena filth. Now the masters had emptied armories, joined rival houses, raised armies, sent enough soldiers to bury valleys in bodies, all for a dwindling band of slaves. Angron laughed until the mountains threw the sound back at them. They are afraid, he said. Joshua smiled. Asti began laughing too, then Labadan, then Clesta. Soon the surviving eaters of cities were laughing with their Primarch, while armies gathered below. The High Riders had finally brought enough men to kill them, and in doing so, they had confessed everything. There were barely more than 50 of them when the last morning came, and hunger had made corpses of some before death possessed the courtesy to finish the work. The eaters of cities huddled beneath the black teeth of the Deshalika mountains, with blankets stiff from old blood wrapped around shoulders that had once filled arena harnesses, their faces hollow, lips split by cold, eyes sunken into sockets above cheeks pared down to bone. Men who had carried shields through Falkar now needed both hands to stand. Fighters who had once laughed, while chirurgeons stitched their wounds, sat silently against the frozen rock, because wasting breath had become another form of spending food. Frost silvered Yokura's chains. Clesta's shriek spear had lost most of its original mechanism and gave only a broken metallic whine when she tested it. Asti possessed 4 knives, which he considered intolerable poverty. Labadan had 1 arm, half a functioning boot, and enough stubbornness remaining to constitute a military resource. Angron stood among them barefoot in the snow, larger than any of them remembered him seeming in Deshea, but somehow more ruined. The butcher's nails trailed from the swollen scars of his skull. Old gunshot wounds crossed fresh burns. His body healed what Nuceria did to it, but never before the world found another way to hurt him. Wind carried the smell of enemy cook fires from the valleys below. The High Riders were eating breakfast before they came to kill the starving. The Eaters had eaten nothing since the previous evening, and what they had eaten then had come from Angron. He sat upon a flat shelf of rock, while Jokura held out a battered metal cup. No one liked watching. That did not stop them from drinking. Angron drew the edge of a knife across the inside of his forearm. The blade opened skin thicker than a mortal man's, and dark blood welled immediately, almost black in the winter half-light. He clenched his fist. Blood ran over his palm and struck the cup in heavy drops. Asti watched from several paces away and grimaced. Still tastes like shit. Angron looked at him. Then starve. Asti considered this with the gravity of a philosopher confronted by an unexpected argument. I withdraw the criticism. Jochura held the cup steady until it was half full. Enough. There are more waiting. And you need blood if you intend to fight. Angron's lip curled. I have more. You also have a talent for losing it. Clesta sat nearby, sharpening the last intact edge of her spearhead. Let him drain himself. Might improve the flavor. Angron glared at her. Clesta met his gaze without concern. The nails punished him for the warmth beneath his anger, so he let the anger remain. They passed the cup from hand to hand. No prayer accompanied it. No one knelt. There was nothing sacred in the act, and none of them mistook desperation for ritual. Primarch blood was thick, metallic, and nauseatingly rich, something made for a body fundamentally different from theirs. They swallowed, because it carried enough strength to keep a starving man upright for another few hours. Labadan drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his remaining hand, and inspected the smear. If I start growing another arm, I am blaming you. Asti looked hopeful. If that happens, may I have the old stump? Labadan stared at him. Why? Knife handle. Jokura closed his eyes. Clesta muttered, I hope the High Riders kill him first. Asti smiled. They have been trying for years. That was how the Eaters discussed death. They had heard noble speeches in arenas, watched condemned fighters salute galleries, and listened to masters proclaim the honor of dying well. They knew better. Death smelled of shit because bowels emptied. Death sounded like a man trying to breathe through blood. Death was a brother asking whether his missing leg was still attached, because shock had not allowed him to understand what his eyes were showing him. There was no dignity in dying. There was only the question of who owned the choice. Weapons were prepared after the feeding. Every remaining cartridge was counted. Yochura arranged magazines upon a blanket and divided them according to which captured rifles still worked. There were so few rounds that no one pretended suppression fire remained possible. Do not shoot because you are frightened, he told them. Shoot because you can see the bastard's teeth. 2 grenades remained. One had a cracked casing and might kill its thrower. Asti volunteered to carry it. No one objected. Broken shields were reinforced with leather straps cut from boots and strips of metal hammered flat between stones. Blades had been sharpened so many times that several were narrower than when they had left the arena armories. Clesta worked on her spear until the whetstone rasped against an edge thin enough to roll beneath pressure. Yoshura replaced a damaged chain link with a loop of wire and tested it against his weight. Labadan scraped dried blood from his axe with a thumbnail. Angron carried a heavy weapon taken months earlier from a dead Kinguard officer, the haft repaired repeatedly and the edge notched from armor and bone. No artisan had named it. No priest had blessed it. It had killed masters. That was enough. Angron moved among the survivors and remembered them as they had been. Yokura had once possessed enough flesh across his shoulders that guards used 2 sets of restraints on him. Now his ribs showed whenever he breathed. Asti had been louder in Deshea, although Angron suspected starvation had improved him. Clesta had worn her hair longer before fire burned most of it away during a city assault, and there had once been a time when the Shriek-Spear's cry made her grin. Larbadan had possessed 2 arms. That memory hurt more than Angron expected. Around them stood men and women he remembered from cages, kitchens, arena tunnels, and labor pens. Some had been adolescents when the rebellion began, and now carried the faces of people twice their age. Others had entered the revolt as veterans and become walking collections of scar tissue held together by hatred. Angron remembered who had once sung badly while marching, who had stolen blankets, who had complained about mud, who had been terrified at Falkar and stood anyway. History would never know them. No iterator would write their names. No monument would carry their faces. The masters would call them criminals after they were dead. Angron realized that if he survived, he would become the only tomb most of them received. Below the mountains, the High Riders prepared with considerably greater comfort. Camps stretched across the approaches in ordered belts of canvas, vehicles, gun positions and banners representing houses that had spent generations murdering one another over inheritance and territory. Hatred of slaves had accomplished what treaties could not. Kin-guard formations marched between camps beneath armor, polished for the final engagement. Automatic weapons were carried to prepared firing points. Grenades were distributed by the crate. Ancient weapons emerged from guarded transports whose interiors glimmered with machinery the Eaters could neither name nor reproduce. Some of the High Riders themselves came to witness the ending, riding upon anti-gravitic platforms, gilded conveyances, and artificer devices preserved through generations of hoarded technological wealth. They did not intend merely to kill Angron. They intended to demonstrate that order had returned. A messenger approached beneath a white cloth near midday. The Eaters almost shot him because Asti argued that the cloth might contain food. Jochura stopped him. The messenger halted well beyond axe range and read from a slate. The High Riders offered clemency to those who surrendered. Escaped gladiators would be returned to lawful custody. Valuable arena stock would receive treatment. Lesser participants would be judged individually according to the severity of their offenses. The Eaters listened. Then they began laughing. The messenger faltered. Larbadan shouted, "Ask whether I get my old cell." Asti called, "Ask whether they kept my knives." Clesta raised the Shriek-Spear. "Ask whether their chirurgeons can sew a noble back together after I cut him in half." Yokura merely shook his chains. Angron walked forward until the messenger recoiled. "Tell them no." The man swallowed. "That is your answer?" Angron looked past him toward the armies filling the valley. "No cages. The alternative is death." "Yes." The messenger waited for something else. Nothing came. Angron turned away. By the time the messenger returned to the High Rider lines, the Eaters were still laughing. Near the center of the ridge, Angron gathered them for the last time. They formed no ceremonial circle. Some sat because standing wasted strength. Others leaned against shields. Snow gathered in Yokura's hair and along the empty sleeve at Larbadan's shoulder. Angron looked from face to face. He had thought for hours about what he might say and hated every version. Words could not repair Falka. They could not put Ernomaeus back together upon arena sand. They could not refill empty bellies, grow Larbadan another arm, or turn 50 survivors into the army that had burned cities. So Angron gave them the only thing he still possessed. "I stay," he said. A few frowned, waiting. "No rear guard takes my place. No one dies so I can run farther. When they come, I stand here." Yokura understood. His chains became still. Angron continued, "If they break the ridge, I fight beside you. If they surround us, I fight beside you. If I fall, it is here." The nails drilled fire through his skull as peace tried to form beneath the words. He let the pain come. "I will not leave you." Labadan raised his axe. "Good," he said, "because none of us could carry you." Laughter moved through the survivors. Angron smiled. Then Yokura asked the question no one wanted answered. "If they take us alive?" Angron's smile vanished. "They will not. You cannot promise that." "Yes, I can." The chain fighter stared at him. Angron looked across all of them. "No master touches you while I breathe." That became the oath. No ceremony made it sacred. The people hearing it did. None of them knew that above Nuceria, beyond the weak winter sky, another civilization had arrived with enough military power to render every army below irrelevant. Void ships hung against the stars, vessels so vast that the largest High Rider strongholds would have fit inside their hulls with room to spare. Their armor was layered against weapons capable of scouring cities from continents. Batteries waited behind adamantium shutters. Launch decks held craft that crossed distances Nucerian armies required months to march. Human warriors moved through those ships, wearing golden plate and bearing arms fashioned by sciences the High Riders would have mistaken for sorcery. Elsewhere waited another inheritance, a legion of gene-forged soldiers created from the same genetic design that had produced Angron, thousands upon thousands of transhuman warriors who had crossed the void conquering worlds in the name of a father their Primarch had never met. At the heart of that impossible fleet was the Emperor of mankind. He looked down upon a planet that had never known what was coming for it. Angron knew none of this. He knew the High Rider horns sounded shortly before sunset. He knew the armies began to climb. The first ranks advanced beneath shields, while gun crews established themselves on lower shelves of stone. Armored vehicles remained farther down, where the passes were wide enough to carry them. High Riders floated above portions of the formation upon archaeotech devices, bright fabrics snapping around bodies wrapped in wealth and machinery. One drifted higher than the rest, corpulent flesh supported by elaborate anti-gravitic gauntlets and boots shaped with obscene ornamentation. The voice that came from him struck Angron like filth remembered. Deshea, the arena announcer, older now, fatter, alive. The High Rider spread his arms and called down to Angron with amplified cheerfulness. "Our champion survives." Angron's vision reddened. The nails sang. Yokura heard the voice and laughed. "I thought I was bored before." The announcer offered them one final return to the arena, couching slavery in forgiveness and calling rebellion a tantrum that had lasted too long. He promised Angron the crowd still remembered him. Angron raised his weapon. "Come take me." The High Riders stopped pretending. The first volley erased almost half the shield wall. Weapons older and more terrible than the rifles used throughout the campaign came alive. Sonic force struck one cluster of eaters and turned bodies into collapsing clouds of atomized flesh. A man beside Clester vanished from the waist upward, his legs taking 2 steps before falling. Microwave energy washed over another section. Blood boiled inside veins. Eyes ruptured. Skin blistered as internal moisture became steam, and fighters collapsed clawing at throats, while cooked organs burst within them. Silver filaments scattered from another High Rider weapon, like shining weeds cast upon the wind. They entered flesh through wounds too small to see, then uncoiled internally. One brother screamed as his abdomen began moving beneath the skin. The monofilament erupted a heartbeat later, dragging intestines, fragments of liver, and pulverized vertebrae through openings it carved from within. Chromac died beneath a beam that transformed the space around him into violent unreality. His weapon fell from hands that no longer possessed the anatomy to hold it. The High Rider armies charged. The last eaters of cities met them. Angron roared. The nails took everything. He entered the killing as though he had spent his entire life walking toward this exact moment. He crushed a Kingard helm beneath his fist and drove the collapsed metal through the skull inside. His axe split another soldier from shoulder to sternum. Clesta disappeared into the melee with her broken spear screaming. Yokura's chains snapped around a throat. Labadan fought one-handed in blood-slick snow. Asti went beneath a shield and opened a man from groin to belly. Above them, the arena announcer laughed. Angron saw him. He sprang. The High Rider's amusement became terror as Angron rose far higher than any mortal body had the right to leap. His hands closed around the gilded mechanisms supporting the noble's legs. The High Rider screamed. Angron pulled. Flesh tore. Blood and entrails poured down warm across Angron's face, while the ruined upper half of the man rose helplessly upon malfunctioning anti-gravitic machinery. Angron landed laughing. Another High Rider drove toward him aboard a gilded war platform. Angron launched himself forward. His fist drew back. He saw exactly where it would strike. Then the universe stopped. Blood hanging in the air became a constellation of frozen crimson beads. A dying kin guard remained motionless halfway through falling. Snow ceased its descent. Sound disappeared. Angron's fist hung a handspan from the High Rider's face. Only Angron's mind still moved. Light appeared before him. Not Nucerian light. Something unbearable. A presence took form inside it, shaped like a man, and yet carrying a weight that made the nails scream against Angron's skull. The voice entered his mind without passing through his ears. "What have they made of you?" Angron tried to move. Nothing obeyed. "Who are you?" The presence seemed to become brighter. "I am the Emperor." The name meant nothing. "I have come for you. There are worlds beyond this one, armies awaiting you, a place among those born as you were born." Angron looked past the radiance. Yokura remained frozen with his chains raised. Clesta stood behind a broken spear. Asti crouched beneath a dead man. Labadan fought with his single arm. His brothers, his sisters, his family. What about them? The answer entered him colder than the mountain wind. They remain here. Your purpose lies elsewhere. The nails bit so deeply that Angron tasted blood. He understood. Another master, another voice informing him that his body belonged somewhere he had not chosen. Another lord looking down from above and calling obedience destiny. No. The presence was silent. Angron fought against the impossible force holding him. "I stay with them. You were made for greater wars than this. This is my war. You command a destiny among the stars. I did not ask for it. Angron." He bared his teeth at the golden thing that called itself his father. "I swore I would die here." The frozen battlefield surrounded him. The eaters of cities waited inside a single stolen instant. Angron looked at them, then back at the Emperor. "I will not abandon my brothers and sisters. Give your armies to someone who wants them. Give your stars to another slave." For the first time, something changed in the presence. Not anger, something almost like regret. Angron strained against the frozen universe and snarled the only answer he had ever intended to give. "I choose them." The Emperor regarded him for one final moment. Then the voice entered Angron's mind again, quieter than before. "I am sorry." The Emperor's apology remained inside Angron's skull for the length of an impossible heartbeat, and then the universe was permitted to move again. Snow resumed its fall. Blood that had hung motionless before his eyes continued downward in crimson droplets. The High Rider war platform completed the last fraction of its advance. The man standing upon it had no knowledge that time had ceased, that something greater than every army upon Nuceria had just spoken to the slave advancing to kill him. Angron's fist crossed the remaining distance and struck the High Rider in the face. Bone ceased to possess shape. The man's skull collapsed beneath the impact, the back of his head bursting against the raised collar of his armor in a spray of blood, hair, and grey matter. Angron landed among the kin guard as the platform slewed sideways and smashed against the mountainside. The nails screamed. Gunfire returned. Men shouted. Somewhere behind him, Yoshura's chains snapped taut around another throat, and the reality of the battlefield closed over the encounter as though it had never happened. Yet the golden presence remained in Angron's thoughts. There were armies waiting for him. Worlds. Stars. A destiny spoken of as though it were a collar polished brightly enough to become something else. He hated it. He hated the offer, the certainty behind it, the assumption that survival was a reward. Most of all, he hated that the Emperor had looked upon the eaters of cities and considered their deaths acceptable. Angron turned toward his family. They were still there. That was enough. Whatever power waited beyond the sky could wait until the High Riders killed him. The enemy bombardment intensified. Lasfire struck the ridge in stabbing pulses, burning through improvised shields and throwing steam from snow already churned red beneath boots. Machine guns hammered from the lower approaches, their barrels walking streams of fire across the eater's position. Rock fragments became shrapnel. A burst struck one slab beside Asti and turned half the stone into a storm of razor fragments. A brother crouched behind it, took several pieces through the face. One entered the eye and disappeared into the skull. Another opened the cheek to the molars. He fell clawing at his ruined head until a second burst removed the top of it entirely. Grenades came behind the gunfire. The first rolled beneath a shield and detonated among 3 defenders, packed too close together to escape. One body vanished beneath the blast, reduced to a rain of flesh and cloth. Another remained alive with the lower abdomen torn open, loops of bowel steaming across the snow. He tried to rise and slipped in his own viscera. Clester caught him under the arm before he fell again, dragged him behind a rock, and placed his own knife in his hand. There was no need to explain why. If the High Riders reached him alive, they would put chains on what remained. The dying fighter understood. He laughed through blood and told her to save the spear for someone worth killing. The eaters endured because movement down the exposed slope would have killed them faster. That was the last tactical truth left to them. The ridge was not victory. It was simply the place where the High Riders could be made to approach through enough broken ground that guns lost some of their authority. Angron waited through the bombardment, with his body bent forward and his hands flexing around his weapon haft. Every strike against the ridge fed the nails. Every scream made violence more difficult to delay. He watched the attackers rather than the dead. Kin Guard formations were climbing in ordered ranks behind shields, confident now that sustained fire had broken what remained of the slaves. Officers signaled reserves forward. The masters believed attrition had finally reduced the eaters to something manageable. Angron saw the moment's certainty became carelessness. The lead formation crossed a shelf of stone where the supporting machine guns could no longer depress far enough to fire without risking their own troops. He raised his weapon. Now! There was no roar from his army. They had spent too much breath already. Barely more than 50 starving survivors simply rose from behind ruined cover and charged downhill. The Kin Guard had expected broken fugitives. What struck them was everything Deshir had spent generations creating. Arena veterans closed the distance before riflemen could reorganize. Angron reached the first rank ahead of everyone. A soldier fired directly into his abdomen. The shot opened flesh and sent blood across the snow. Angron continued through it and brought his weapon down upon the man's shoulder. Armor split, collarbone shattered. The blade drove through the chest until it buried itself near the opposite hip, opening the torso so completely that the soldier folded around the weapon. Angron kicked him free and entered the formation. A shield struck his chest. He seized its rim and pulled. The Kin Guard behind it came with the shield. Angron smashed him against the mountainside hard enough that the backplate collapsed and his spine burst through the abdomen in a red protrusion beneath the armor. Another soldier thrust a bayonet. Angron caught the rifle behind the blade and tore it sideways. Fingers remained around the grip after the weapon came free. The soldier stared at the torn hand in disbelief. Angron shoved the bloody rifle stock through his mouth. Teeth sprayed across the man behind him. Panic entered the formation, not because soldiers had never seen death, but because every weapon they trusted was being rendered meaningless by proximity to something too large, too fast, and too angry to behave like flesh. Jochura found a narrow channel between two outcrops, where Kingard tried to pass in pairs. There his chain became more useful than any firearm. He looped it around the throat of the first man and stepped behind the rock, using the soldier's own advance to tighten the links beneath the gorget. The Kingard dropped his rifle and clawed at the chain. Jochura pulled harder. Cartilage gave way. The man's choking became a liquid rattle. Jochura dragged the corpse backward and used it to trip the soldier behind him. Then he wrapped the chain around the second man's helmet and twisted until the neck broke. Clester fought several paces away, where the approach widened. Her shriek spear had lost the magnificent mechanical scream it once possessed, but the damaged mechanism still produced a tortured metallic shriek every time she thrust. She used reach with merciless economy. One Kingard took the blade beneath the chin, another lost an eye. A third caught the spear through the armpit as he raised his rifle. Clester kicked him off the blade before the body's weight could trap it. She had always understood that spectacle was wasteful. The Masters had given her a weapon designed to make noise. She had made it efficient. Asti disappeared wherever the fighting became too close for anyone else to see his hands. A knife came from beneath his sleeve and entered a soldier's kidney. Another emerged from his boot. A third appeared from somewhere Jochura had once refused to search. He cut straps, opened throats, stabbed behind knees, and slipped blades through visor gaps too narrow for larger weapons. A Kingard officer seized Asti by the collar and lifted him bodily. Asti grinned into the man's face. "You should have searched me better." His hand came up, holding a sliver of steel no longer than a finger. He pushed it through the officer's eye. The man screamed and released him. Asti caught the officer's falling sidearm before it hit the ground and fired into another soldier at such close range that the shot entered beneath the jaw and blew the crown of the skull apart. Larbaden fought beside the last intact section of the shield line. His missing arm no longer mattered, because there was nothing left in his body he had not already decided to spend. He trapped an incoming spear beneath his axe haft, stamped upon the shaft, and pulled the wielder forward. His axe entered the man's throat. Blood sheeted over Larbaden's only hand. A rifle round struck him in the side. He looked down at the wound as though mildly inconvenienced, then buried the axe in another face. Angron saw them all. That became the only structure remaining inside his rage. Jochura, Clester, Asti, Larbaden. Every few heartbeats he looked for them. The nails wanted the battlefield reduced to red movement and impact, but Angron refused to let them erase his family. A brother vanished beneath 3 Kingard. Angron tore through the soldiers to reach him and found the man already dead, throat open to the spine. A sister he remembered from the Deshir kitchens lost a leg to a grenade and continued stabbing upward from the ground until someone shot her through the head. Another fighter wrapped both arms around a Kingard soldier while dying from a wound through the lungs, holding him still so the brother behind could drive a spear through both bodies. Each death entered Angron as grief and emerged as violence because the nails permitted no other road. He broke a man over his knee. He seized another by the helmet and hammered the head against stone until the visor became a cavity filled with blood and pulverized bone. He pulled an arm from its shoulder and used the severed limb to knock the dead man's comrade from his feet. Gore covered him until his own blood and enemy blood became impossible to distinguish. The High Riders began understanding what their ancestors had made beneath Deshir. They had taken a creature built for conquest and taught him that peace was agony. They had opened his skull, inserted machines among the architecture of his brain, and rewarded murder chemically until killing became the only silence he could reliably find. Now they sent men into reach of his hands and discovered the final consequence. Angron tore through their formations with no concern for defense. Blades entered him, lasers burned him, bullets buried themselves in muscle. None mattered because he had already accepted death. Fear existed to protect the future, and Angron possessed no future he wanted. His refusal to survive made him more dangerous than any tactical calculation could account for. High Rider officers shouted for concentrated fire. Soldiers could not comply because their own men surrounded him. Others tried withdrawing to restore distance. Angron followed. The engagement dissolved into knots of isolated combat all across the ridge, the last Eaters dragging their technologically superior enemies into the only kind of war the slaves had ever truly owned. Through all of it came laughter. Asti laughed when his captured pistol clicked empty and he threw it into a soldier's face before drawing another knife. Jochura laughed as 3 men tried to drag him down, and he strangled one with the same chain wrapped around his own arm. Labadan laughed blood through his teeth when a kin guard demanded his surrender. Clesta laughed when the ruined shriek spear finally snapped beneath an armored body and left her holding little more than a sharpened half-shaft. The sound spread. Men dying in the snow laughed at the masters advancing to kill them. It unsettled the kin guard more effectively than threats. The High Riders had expected terror. They received mockery. Angron understood why. There would be no recapture now. Too much blood had been spent. Too many bodies had been ruined beyond their value to arena chirurgeons. The masters could kill them, but they could never put the Eaters of cities back into the cages from which they had escaped. The rebellion had failed to conquer Nuceria. It had succeeded in the one thing that mattered more. The final choice belonged to the slaves. "Still here?" Jochura shouted across the melee. Half his face was blood. Angron buried his axe in a kin guard breastplate and answered, "Unfortunately." Asti, somewhere out of sight, called, "I knew he would complain at the end." Labadan barked laughter. Clesta shouted something obscene at all of them. Angron felt the nails cut deeper as affection tried to rise, but he did not resist the feeling this time. Let them hurt him. There would not be many minutes left in which pain mattered. Another enemy formation was climbing toward the ridge. Behind it came more. High Rider reserves filled the lower approaches, banners moving through smoke, while gun crews prepared another bombardment. The last Eaters were too scattered, too wounded, and too few to survive the next impact. Angron knew it with the same certainty with which he knew his own name. He looked around. Jochura stood. Clesta stood. Asti stood. Labadan stood. Enough. This was the death he had chosen. He had failed to free the planet, failed to destroy every master, failed to save the thousands who had followed him from city to city. He had watched his army reduced to a few dozen starving bodies upon a frozen ridge. None of that mattered in the final measure. He was still beside them. When Amias had been taken from him, his childhood had been taken, his mind had been mutilated, his life had belonged to other men for longer than he cared to remember. This one thing remained his. He would die with his family. The High Rider line came on. Angron raised his weapon. Jochura tightened his chains. Clesta lowered the broken spear. Asti drew his last knife. Labadan lifted his axe. Angron smiled. "Brothers," he said. The word hurt. "Sisters." The nails screamed. The enemy charged. Angron stepped forward. Golden light swallowed him. There was no impact. No blade entering flesh. No gunshot. No honor in being overwhelmed beneath the bodies of enemies. One instant, Nuceria surrounded him with snow, blood, and the people he loved. The next, there was metal beneath his feet. Angron staggered. The weapon remained raised in his hands. Silence surrounded him. Not mountain silence. Mechanical silence. Vast, controlled, sterile. The air tasted wrong. Warm, filtered, recycled through machinery. He looked down. Blood dripped from his body onto a polished deck. He turned. Walls of metal surrounded him, marked with symbols he did not know. Lumens burned overhead without smoke or flame. Machinery hummed beneath the floor with power beyond anything Nuceria possessed. No Yokura, no Clester, no Asti, no Larbadon. Angron spun toward where the ridge should have been. Nothing. His breath stopped. No. The nails drove pain through him. He ignored it. No. He ran to the nearest wall and struck it. Metal dented. Put me back. No answer. Angron struck again. Put me back. Somewhere far below the ship, beyond armor, atmosphere, and distance, the battle continued without him. The Eaters of Cities were dying. His brothers and sisters were keeping the oath he had made. Angron alone had been denied it. He stared at his blood upon the alien floor and understood the full cruelty of what had been done. The High Riders had failed to capture him. The Emperor had succeeded. Angron was alive. For the first time in his life, survival felt worse than death. Angron destroyed the chamber because there was nothing else within reach. His first blow struck the wall hard enough to deform metal beneath his fist. His second ruptured a lumen conduit and showered the deck with sparks. By the third, the butcher's nails were shrieking through his skull, and the polished compartment around him had become Deshare again, another cage built by men who believed superior machinery transformed captivity into authority. Put me back. The words came through clenched teeth. No answer followed. He struck the wall again. The plating buckled inward, revealing cabling and structural ribs beneath. Put me back. Warning tones sounded somewhere beyond the sealed doors. Angron seized a section of exposed metal and tore it free. He hurled it across the chamber. It struck the opposite wall with enough force to bury one edge in the plating. Blood ran freely from half-healed wounds across his body, dripping onto a deck so clean that each crimson splash looked obscene. He did not care. He had been bleeding upon Nuceria moments before. Yokura had been there. Clester, Asti, Larbadon. Barely more than 50 brothers and sisters standing in the snow, laughing at the armies climbing to kill them. Angron had promised them his death. That was all he had possessed that no High Rider could confiscate. His blood had fed them. His strength had shielded them. His life had belonged beside theirs. Then another master had reached down from above and decided that even death was something Angron was too ignorant to choose for himself. The doors opened. Golden warriors entered with weapons raised, their armor brighter than anything Angron had seen upon Nuceria, their movements disciplined in a manner even the best Kinguard had never achieved. They were enormous by mortal standards. They still looked small to him. One spoke in a voice flattened by a helm grill. "Lord Angron, stand down." Angron stared at him. Lord. The High Riders had used titles too. They had wrapped ownership in laws, contracts, and heraldry, as though decoration altered the chain beneath. "Take me back." The warrior did not move. "That is not permitted." Angron laughed. The sound was low and ugly. "Permitted." The nails rewarded him when rage replaced grief. His vision narrowed. "You speak their tongue already." The warrior began another sentence. Angron never heard the end. He crossed the chamber, caught the golden soldier beneath one arm, and smashed him into the wall. Armor boomed against metal. Angron struck again. Something inside the warrior's plate broke with a wet crunch. Another raised his weapon. Angron seized the barrel and wrenched it aside before it discharged, then drove his forehead into the warrior's faceplate. Ceramite buckled. Blood ran from the grill. More entered. More tried to restrain him. The chamber became blood and sparks, until a pressure greater than chains locked Angron's muscles and forced him to his knees. The Emperor did not speak. Angron screamed anyway. Below them, the Eaters of Cities died. No chronicler among the expeditionary fleets recorded their final words. No remembrancer stood upon the Deshalika heights. No imperial picked capture preserved Yokura's last cast of the chain, or the moment Clester's broken shriek spear finally left her hands. No official archive remembered which knife Asti used last, or how long Labadan remained standing after one arm. Starvation and half a war had already tried to kill him. The High Riders completed the work Angron had forced them to spend armies accomplishing. Lasers burned through flesh already weakened by hunger. Machine gun fire cut down bodies that had walked through city after city. Grenades rolled between rocks stained with frozen blood. The last Eaters fought because there was nowhere else to go, and because at the end, nowhere else was where they wanted to be. They had escaped the pits. They had eaten cities. They had broken armies at Falkar and turned High Rider law into ash. They could not defeat New Syria. That had ceased to matter. The only victory remaining was refusal, and they carried it to death. None were dragged back beneath Deshir in chains. None fought again for an arena crowd. None lived to accuse Angron of abandoning them. That accusation required survivors. The absence of survivors made the wound deeper. When the Emperor permitted Angron to stand again, the Primarch did not thank him. He would never remember the intervention as rescue. Rescue was something a brother did when he dragged another fighter from beneath a corpse pile. Rescue was Jokura taking a rearguard position. Rescue was Clester closing a shield wall gap. Rescue was Labadan refusing to let others waste strength carrying him. This had been abduction. The Emperor possessed greater weapons than the High Riders, greater armies, greater authority, and a prison large enough to travel between stars. Angron understood the hierarchy immediately. New Syria had merely been provincial slavery. This was slavery perfected by scale. The Emperor spoke of mankind, unity, conquest, and the destiny for which Angron had been created. Each word made the nails pulse. Angron listened with blood drying across his hands. You could have saved them. The Emperor's expression did not change. I saved you. Angron's laugh had no humor in it. Then you saved the wrong one. The 12th Legion waited for their father beneath another name. The Warhounds had fought across worlds before Angron knew worlds existed. They were gene-forged killers raised in the Imperium's laboratories, trained beneath banners, supplied by armories whose magazines could feed wars for years. Their plate was white and blue. Their officers wore the marks of rank with the controlled pride of men who had earned them in campaigns beneath alien suns. They had known for years that somewhere in the void existed the Primarch from whom their gene seed descended. Other legions had reunited with their gene sires and been transformed by the encounter. Traditions changed. Heraldry changed. The sons learned the culture of the father, and the father beheld thousands of warriors carrying echoes of his own blood. The Warhounds prepared for revelation. They received Angron. He came to them covered in the gore of New Syria and whatever blood he had spilled aboard the Emperor's vessel. The scars of the nails stood raw around his skull. His eyes held none of the recognition the legionaries had imagined. He looked upon them and saw weapons belonging to the man who had stolen him from the mountain. That was all. The first officers approached with ceremony. Angron killed them. One captain entered the chamber with his helm beneath his arm and began to offer the formal allegiance of his company. Angron seized him before he completed the first sentence and broke his neck. An equerry attempted to reason with him and died when Angron drove his face through a bulkhead fitting. Another officer entered armed, perhaps believing preparedness might succeed where diplomacy had failed. Angron ripped the weapon from his grasp, tore the man's arm from its socket in the same motion, and beat him to death with the severed limb, while blood painted the white armor of the legionaries waiting beyond the door. The Warhounds had seen battlefield mutilation before. They had watched artillery reduce men to red vapor and chain blades open xenos from shoulder to pelvis. This was different. They were watching their genetic father murder his own sons with the indifference of an arena beast killing handlers. Some understood that he was mad. Others understood something worse. He was sane enough to know they belonged to the Emperor, and that alone condemned them. The bodies accumulated. No one called it mutiny. A Primarch could not mutiny against his own legion. There was no regulation describing what to do when the Gene-Sire despised his sons before learning their names. Eventually, Khan went in. He was 8th captain then, not yet the figure future ages would remember beneath another title. His war plate bore campaign scars rather than the accumulated ruin of centuries. He carried no illusion that skill would protect him if Angron decided to kill him. Whatever advantages an Astartes possessed over a mortal disappeared in the presence of a Primarch, and Angron was not merely a Primarch. He was a Primarch mutilated into a state where violence provided the nearest thing his mind could experience as peace. Khan left his weapons outside. Other officers objected. Khan ignored them. He entered the chamber. Angron sat among the dead. A captain lay near his feet with the head turned completely around. Another corpse rested against the wall, torso crushed inward, where Angron had struck through the breastplate. Blood streaked the deck beneath the Primarch's bare feet. Khan stopped beyond arm's reach, though both knew the distance meant nothing. Angron looked at him. "You are next," Khan answered, "if you decide I am." No salute, no kneeling. Angron's eyes narrowed. "Name?" "Kern." "Rank?" "8th captain." "Another master's title?" "It is." That answer brought him another heartbeat. Angron leaned forward. "You came to tell me I command you." "No." "Then why are you here?" "To learn whether you intend to kill every son who walks through the door." Angron smiled. "Perhaps." Karn looked at the corpses. "Then I would rather know why before my turn." The nails pulsed. Angron rose. Karn did not move. "You think courage impresses me?" "No." "Good." Angron circled him as though inspecting a pit opponent. "You have armor, ships, guns, food enough to feed armies. You call yourselves warriors." "We are. My warriors fought half naked." Khan said nothing. They had stolen rifles until the ammunition died, spears after that, chains, knives. One of them fought with one arm because rot took the other. The captain watched him. They crossed cities on bleeding feet. They drank my blood because there was nothing left to eat. When the masters brought armies, they laughed. Khan understood that this was not boasting. The Primarch's voice had changed. The rage remained, but grief stood beneath it like a blade hidden under cloth. What were they called? Angron stopped. For several seconds the chamber held only the hum of distant machinery. "My brothers and sisters." Khan waited. Angron's jaw tightened. "The Eaters of Cities." There it was, a name belonging to dead mortals spoken inside a starship filled with transhuman warriors who had never heard it. Khan repeated it once. "Eaters of Cities." Angron turned away. "They were better than you." The insult was deliberate. Khan accepted it. "Then teach us why." Angron looked back. The nails twitched. Beneath scar tissue. Teach you? If they were warriors you respected, there was something in them we lack. You lack everything they had. Then begin there. Angron crossed the room so quickly that Khan barely saw the movement. The Primarch's hand closed around his throat and lifted him from the deck. Khan's boots hung above the blood. Fingers tightened against the gorget. "You think I want sons?" Khan forced the words out. "No." "You think I want your legion?" "No." "Then stop offering it to me." "I am not offering." Angron squeezed harder. Khan's vision darkened. "I am telling you it already exists." For some reason, that stopped him. Angron released him. Kern hit the deck on one knee and coughed. He did not reach for a weapon he had deliberately left outside. Angron watched. Khan rose. That was how their relationship began. Not with love, not with reverence, but with one man refusing to tell Angron a comforting lie. The Eaters of Cities entered Legion memory slowly. Khan carried the name from the chamber because Angron himself rarely repeated it. Among the warhounds, Men tried to understand what sort of mortal army could matter more to a Primarch than thousands of his own gene sons. Some resented the comparison, others became obsessed with it. Captain Dreger heard the story and understood the challenge concealed inside the grief. If starving mortals with pit weapons had been the eaters of cities, then the legion descended from Angron could become something greater. The phrase changed in the mouths of Astartes, not to replace the dead, though few of them understood how impossible replacement truly was. To inherit the scale of the name. World Eaters. The title spread. Angron heard it and did not reject it. That was the closest thing to acceptance the Legion received. There was no triumph when the old heraldry changed, no great reconciliation in which Angron embraced his sons and discovered a family reborn. The name was a gravestone the warhounds mistook for a battle honor. They called themselves World Eaters because it sounded like promise. Angron heard Eaters and remembered Clester, Yokura, Asti, Larbaden. He remembered shield walls, broken gates, bowls of his own blood passed between starving hands. Every legionary who wore the new name carried a fragment of a dead rebellion without knowing the weight of what he bore. A century passed. Empires burned. The Emperor's great crusade became civil war. Horus turned against Terra. Legions butchered legions. The sons Angron had never wanted took the nails into their own skulls in imitation of the mutilation that had ruined their father. Worlds learned to fear the World Eaters. Khan became something harder than the captain who had once entered a room without weapons. Lorgar found gods in the darkness. Argel Tal became host to a creature that should not have existed. Angron became strong enough to kill almost anything placed before him. None of it changed the mountains. The memory released him slowly. Angron opened his eyes. He was standing once more beneath the cold sky of Nuceria, surrounded by the bones of the people who had died after the Emperor took him away. Wind crossed the Deshelika heights and hissed through empty rib cages. Snow gathered in the sockets of skulls. Khan stood several paces behind him. Argel Tal remained silent beside the World Eater. Lorgar watched his brother with the same patient attention he had shown before the memory swallowed him. Angron looked down at the corroded chains half buried in the earth. Yokura. He looked toward the remains of the spear. Clester. His gaze moved across bones that no one else could name. Asti. Larbaden. Khan lowered his head. Angron noticed. Do not mourn them. Khan looked up. You never knew them. No, sire. Angron's lip curled. Do not call me that here. Khan corrected himself. Angron. For once the Primarch allowed it. Lorgar stepped nearer. You believe you should have died with them. Angron turned his head. Believe? Lorgar remained still. I promised. The nails clicked and pulsed within his skull. I gave them one thing no master could take. I told them I would stand beside them when the end came. His hand closed into a fist. And then your Emperor took even that. Our Emperor, Lorgar said, softly. Angron laughed. Not mine. The wind strengthened, carrying snow across the ancient battlefield. It moved through the bones with a whispering rattle, as though the dead were shifting in their sleep. Angron stood above them, wearing armor that could survive weapons his brothers and sisters could never have imagined. Behind him waited warriors capable of conquering worlds. Above him hung ships that could kill cities without descending into their streets. He had commanded armies numbering beyond anything the Eaters of cities had known. He had broken civilizations, butchered champions, and survived a century of wars that would have erased mortal men from memory. He could not change this patch of frozen ground. He could not put an arm back upon Larbaden. He could not return Asti's knives. He could not hear Clester's shriek spear scream again. He could not feel Yokura's chain tighten beside him at the last stand. Power had given him worlds and denied him one battlefield. The Emperor had saved his life. Angron looked across the bones of his family and understood, as he had understood every day since New Syria, that salvation was merely another word masters used when they wanted gratitude for deciding a slave's fate. The wind passed through the dead. Angron remained. That was the punishment. He had survived.